Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. This is the moment Andy McCauley realized the police were closing in. Just hours earlier, Riley Crossman, a bright and spirited 15-year-old, went eerily silent. When her worried family contacted authorities, the initial investigation seemed routine. Her bedroom appeared to be nothing more than the typical chaos of a teenager's life. Cluttered but unremarkable. However, as officers dug deeper into the room, the narrative shifted. Items a teenager might take if planning to run away were still there, untouched. Then the discovery no one wanted to make. Traces of blood on Riley's bedsheets, and more on her comforter. What started as a missing persons case had taken a dark and sinister turn. The question was no longer where Riley was, but what had happened to her. Riley entered the world on December 22, 2003, in the charming town of Martinsburg, West Virginia. Nestled in the northeastern corner of the state, this close-knit community of 20,000 residents boasts picturesque surroundings and a small-town charm that feels like a step back in time. Just a short drive from bustling metropolitan areas like Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., Martinsburg offered Riley a tranquil yet accessible upbringing. With its low cost of living, tight-knit community, and a sense of safety, it was the kind of place where families could thrive and children could grow up, surrounded by the warmth of familiarity and belonging. Riley shared a close bond with her siblings, especially her younger sister, Jade, and older brothers, Ryder and Parker. Though her childhood was mostly quiet, her parents' divorce deeply affected her and her siblings, strengthening their bond as they coped together. After the separation, Riley and her siblings regularly visited their father in Martinsburg, but lived with their mother, Chantel, in Berkeley Springs, about 25 miles away. Their household dynamic changed further when Chantel's boyfriend, Andy McCauley, eventually moved in with them. Riley was often described by friends and family as caring, reliable, creative, and a bit stubborn. Despite her strong will, she had an innocence and naivety that set her apart from many girls her age. With a wide circle of friends, an active social life, and outstanding academic achievements, Riley seemed destined for a bright future. By 2018, her happiness grew even more when she met Hayden Lacey, her future boyfriend. The two hit it off instantly, quickly forming a close bond. They met each other's families, attended school dances together at Berkeley Springs High, and stayed connected through endless chats, texts, and FaceTime calls whenever they were apart. For the residents of Berkeley Springs, Tuesday, May 7, 2019 began like any other day. The weather was warm, hinting at summer's arrival, and Riley had a typical day at school. When she returned home just after 3 p.m., her mother, Chantel, was asleep on the sofa, exhausted from juggling 2 jobs and not feeling well. Riley, considerate as always, let her mom rest, but eventually woke her up to ensure she wouldn't be late for her evening shift. After Chantel left for work, Riley spent her evening with her brothers, grandmother Debbie and Andy McCauley. When her grandmother left around 7:30 p.m., Riley went to her room to FaceTime with Hayden. However, their conversation quickly turned into an argument. Riley was upset about Hayden's upcoming school trip to Washington, D.C., worried he might get too friendly with his classmates. By 10 p.m., Hayden had fallen asleep, but Riley sent him a chilling message at 11:01 p.m. Andy's in my room. Sure, don't say anything about it, so he can hear everything. Just 12 minutes later, she sent another and final message. I'm scared, babe. When Chantel returned home from work that night, she noticed Riley's bedroom door was closed. Assuming her daughter was either asleep or texting Hayden, she decided not to disturb her. What exactly transpired between 11:01 p.m. that night and the following morning remains a mystery. However, when Hayden woke up at 5 a.m. on Wednesday, May 8th, he was startled to find a missed FaceTime call from Riley, sent during the late hours of the previous night. Around 7:15 a.m., Chantel went to check on Riley, but found her room empty. She wasn't anywhere in the house either. Riley didn't usually leave for school that early, but Chantel wasn't alarmed. Knowing about Hayden's class trip, she assumed Riley had walked to school early to see him before his departure. Nothing in Riley's bedroom appeared unusual, but Chantel did notice that Riley hadn't taken her purse, glasses, or phone charger, items she never left home without. While this seemed odd, it didn't raise immediate concerns. The day carried on as usual, with everyone expecting to see Riley home by 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon. But when she didn't return, her grandmother began to worry, sensing something was wrong. Chantel tried calling and texting Riley multiple times, but every attempt went straight to voicemail, and her messages remained unanswered. This was immediately alarming. Like most teenagers, Riley was rarely without her phone, and always quick to respond to calls or texts. Moreover, she made it a point to inform her mother or grandmother if she planned to be late. As the worry set in, Chantel began piecing things together and realized she hadn't actually seen Riley the night before. She had checked on her sometime after 10 p.m., but the closed door had stopped her from going in, respecting her daughter's privacy. The realization deepened her concern. Something felt undeniably wrong. Andy's behavior took an unsettling turn when Chantel informed him that Riley was missing. Though he said he would help look for her, his actions raised suspicion. Chantel immediately drove to Berkeley Springs High School, just a few blocks away, only to discover the chilling truth. Riley had never made it to school that day. Horrified, she rushed back home, where Andy soon left on his bicycle, claiming he was going to search for Riley. However, when Chantel returned home later, she found Andy asleep on the couch instead of out looking for her missing daughter. Frustration and panic gripped Chantel. Her instincts told her that something was terribly wrong. Desperate for answers, she contacted Riley's boyfriend, Hayden, hoping he might know where she was. To her dismay, Hayden revealed he hadn't talked to, texted, or seen Riley all day. Overwhelmed with fear, Chantel knew it was time to act. Without wasting another moment, she called 911 and reported her daughter missing. When teenagers go missing, police often react cautiously, as many cases involve runaways who return home within a day or two. But this was different. According to Riley's father, Lance, and everyone who knew her, disappearing without a word was completely out of character. Riley was thoughtful and responsible, the kind of person who wouldn't leave her friends and family worried unnecessarily. At just 15 years old and unable to drive, the possibility of her vanishing intentionally seemed remote. The grim reality was that something had happened, whether an accident or something far worse. As officers began their investigation, they searched the area around Riley's school and home, questioning family members for clues. They also reached out to her friends, hoping to piece together her last known movements. To their surprise, at least one friend mentioned a chilling possibility. Riley may not have come home because she was afraid of Andy McCauley. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation, raising even more questions about what had happened to her. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Andy McCauley. They were well aware of his troubling past, an addict with a lengthy criminal record that included charges for drug offenses, burglary, and assault spanning nearly a decade. With such a history, Andy became a person of interest in Riley's disappearance almost immediately. When officers arrived at the home to question Andy McCauley, he appeared helpful and cooperative, answering their routine inquiries without resistance. Meanwhile, the community sprang into action, with scores of concerned residents joining the search for Riley. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, the Morgan County Sheriff's Office wasted no time in notifying law enforcement agencies in neighboring Maryland and Virginia, knowing that kidnappers often cross state lines. Federal agencies, including the FBI, ATF, and the Department of Homeland Security, were also brought in to assist, leveraging their extensive resources and expertise in handling complex missing persons cases. When officers revealed the chilling text messages Riley had sent to hide in the night before, Chantel made a shocking suggestion that Andy may have entered Riley's room to assault her. It's unclear why Chantel made this claim, or if Andy had previously displayed inappropriate behavior toward Riley. Nevertheless, this revelation cast an even darker shadow over the investigation. Andy was questioned multiple times at the home during the early stages of the case, each session probing deeper into his potential involvement. Investigators even showed him the text messages Riley had sent to hide, hoping to gauge his reaction and uncover any inconsistencies in his story. Despite his cooperative facade, the unsettling possibility of his involvement couldn't be ignored. Andy initially appeared cooperative, even volunteering to take a polygraph test. Since he wasn't under arrest, he went to the station willingly. However, the test results came back inconclusive. Andy was under the influence of drugs at the time. Later, he faced further questioning by officers from the Morgan County Sheriff's Office and the West Virginia State Police. During his interview, Andy claimed he had been asleep throughout the night of May 7th and into the early morning of May 8th. However, this alibi was quickly called into question when phone records revealed he had sent nearly a dozen text messages to a friend around 2:30 a.m. Confronted with this evidence, Andy admitted he had left the house on foot that night. He explained that he was experiencing severe withdrawal symptoms and had gone out to buy drugs, claiming he felt horrible and desperate to ease his discomfort. This admission only deepened investigators' suspicions. Andy told investigators he woke up around 4 a.m. on May 8th and left for work about an hour later. As a construction worker for a local company, he claimed to have spent the entire day at a job site in the Red Hill subdivision. However, this account was soon contradicted by his employer, who revealed that Andy had asked for 3 heavy-duty trash bags that morning, saying he needed to clean up another job site. When Andy returned 4 to 5 hours later, his boss noticed his shoes were untied and his clothes were disheveled, as if he had dressed in a rush. Adding to the inconsistencies, investigators obtained CCTV footage showing Andy leaving the job site in his green truck and driving along multiple roads. Some of these roads, including the Tuscarora Pike, were not between the Red Hill subdivision and the other locations he claimed to have visited. Initially, Andy denied being on the Tuscarora Pike, but when confronted with the footage, he reluctantly admitted to lying yet again. His excuse? He claimed he had gone to buy drugs and didn't want to incriminate himself. However, this explanation fell apart when a coworker informed investigators that Andy already had cocaine with him that day, making it unnecessary for him to purchase more. With a gaping 4 to 5 hour window unaccounted for, investigators strongly suspected that Andy's activities during that time were directly connected to Riley's disappearance. Morgan County Sheriff Corporal Luke Shambaugh revealed that Andy had lied about nearly everything and repeatedly changed his story, raising even more suspicion. Investigators were unanimous. Andy was somehow involved in Riley's disappearance. The challenge now was to prove it, and if possible, locate Riley before it was too late. When saliva and DNA matching Riley's were found on a pillow in her bedroom, the fear that she might already be dead began to set in. As the days passed with no sign of Riley, even her most optimistic friends and family members started to lose hope. Then, 8 days after Riley vanished, their worst fears were tragically confirmed. On Saturday, May 16, 2019, a devastating discovery was made. A body wrapped in heavy-duty black trash bags was found along an embankment of Tuscarora Pike, approximately 25 miles 40 kilometers southeast of Riley's home in Berkeley Springs. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, immediate identification was impossible, but investigators were certain the remains belonged to a young woman or teenage girl. The victim's t-shirt was bunched around her neck and shoulders, and she was wearing torn, partially unzipped denim shorts. Oddly, her underwear had been pulled unnaturally high, as if someone else had dressed her. A chalky white substance was found on her shoes, and screws were scattered at the scene. Although investigators strongly suspected the body was Riley's, they refrained from informing her parents until positive identification could be made. However, they shared the discovery with Andy McCauley, now their prime suspect, to gauge his reaction. Upon hearing about the body near Tuscarora Pike, Andy became visibly flustered, asking if investigators knew who it was. When told the body had not been identified, he replied, "I hope it's not Riley. She was like a daughter to me, and I loved her." The following day, the body was sent to the office of the chief medical examiner in Charleston, West Virginia, where dental records confirmed the devastating truth. It was Riley Crossman, though the advanced decomposition prevented the examiner from determining an exact cause of death. The case was officially ruled a homicide. Investigators continued piecing together the evidence. The white substance on Riley's shoes was identified as commercial drywall mud, and screws similar to those found at the scene were located in Andy's truck and tool belt. With a growing mountain of incriminating evidence, it became clear that Andy McCauley was deeply entangled in the tragic death of Riley Crossman. Investigators concluded that on May 7, 2019, Andy McCauley entered Riley's room while she was lying face down on her bed and either strangled or smothered her with a pillow. They suspected his motive was sexual, though the medical examiner found no evidence to confirm this. However, Riley's mother, Chantel, had previously informed investigators that Andy might have entered her room intending to assault her, and that he could become aggressive when under the influence of drugs. On May 16, 2019, the same day Riley's body was identified, police arrested Andy McCauley and charged him with her murder. For the small, tight-knit community of Morgan County, this was an unprecedented and horrifying crime. Prosecutor Dan James noted that the area, while no stranger to crime, had never encountered anything as chilling as Riley's murder. After more than 2 years, Andy's trial began on September 27, 2021. The courtroom was packed with people, emotions running high as the community sought justice for Riley. Among those present were family members, friends, and circuit court officials, all grappling with the weight of a case that had shaken their town to its core. Judge Deborah McLaughlin presided over the courtroom, filled with Riley's parents, friends, relatives, members of the press, local and federal law enforcement officials, Prosecutor Dan James, the jury, and the defendant Andy McCauley, accompanied by his attorney, Andrew Arnold. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Andy's plea of not guilty came as a shock to many. In cases like this, defense attorneys often advise their clients to plead guilty and seek leniency from the court or negotiate reduced charges for a lighter sentence. But Andy chose to take his chances in court. State Prosecutor Dan James opened the trial with a compelling overview of the crime, detailing how the tragic events unfolded. He meticulously laid out the evidence against Andy, painting a clear picture of his guilt. In a particularly gut-wrenching moment, James rhetorically questioned why Riley's shorts and underwear were torn. Although it was never conclusively proven that Riley had been assaulted, the pointed question reminded the jury of the horrific nature of the crime and the unimaginable suffering Riley endured. The prosecution's powerful narrative set the tone for a trial that would expose every disturbing detail of the case. When Riley's mother took the stand, she delivered a calm and measured account of the events surrounding her daughter's disappearance. Her demeanor was sober, almost emotionless, as she recounted the harrowing details, a reflection of the immense grief and trauma she had endured. Her testimony painted a vivid picture of the days leading up to Riley's disappearance and the devastating aftermath. Following her, Dr. Pyotr Kubitschek from the Office of the Medical Examiner provided expert testimony about the condition of Riley's body and the results of the autopsy. He described the advanced state of decomposition, the challenges it posed to determining an exact cause of death, and the evidence, or lack thereof, regarding any potential assault. His testimony underscored the tragic nature of Riley's final moments, further strengthening the prosecution's case against Andy McCauley. Dr. Pyotr Kubitschek testified that Riley's shorts were found unzipped and unbuttoned, with her underwear partially torn. This disturbing detail added to the already grim evidence, suggesting the possibility of a struggle or an attempted assault. His testimony reinforced the horrific nature of the crime and left the jury with a chilling impression of what Riley may have endured in her final moments. West Virginia State Police Sergeant Sean Wolf provided further unsettling details during his testimony. He noted that Riley's shorts and underwear were hiked up unnaturally high, far beyond what would be considered normal, with a portion of her genitals exposed. This observation added a deeply disturbing layer to the case, raising questions about the circumstances surrounding her death and emphasizing the heinous nature of the crime. Sergeant Sean Wolf also testified that strangulation and suffocation could not be ruled out as causes of Riley's death, despite the medical examiner's inability to determine an exact cause. However, this statement was later stricken from the record, as Wolf was not qualified to make such a determination. Nonetheless, his words left a vivid and horrifying impression on the jurors and others in the courtroom, underscoring the seriousness of the crime. Later, forensic experts testified that the drywall mud and screws found with Riley's body matched those in Andy McCauley's truck and tool belt, further tying him to the crime scene. Another key witness, Howard Rourke, Andy's former boss, provided damning testimony. He recounted how Andy had asked for heavy-duty trash bags on the morning of May 8th, left the job site for 4 to 5 hours, and returned with untied shoes and disheveled clothing, as if he had hurriedly dressed. His observations added significant weight to the prosecution's case, painting a picture of Andy's suspicious behavior on the day Riley went missing. During the week-long trial, prosecutors meticulously presented over 120 pieces of evidence, building a compelling case against Andy McCauley. Among the evidence was CCTV footage showing Andy driving along Tuscarora Pike on May 8th, the same area where Riley's body was later discovered. This footage placed him in the vicinity at a critical time, further tying him to the crime. In his closing arguments, prosecutor Dan James emphasized that the murder was not a spontaneous act, but a premeditated crime. He highlighted the calculated steps Andy had taken, including his suspicious actions on the day Riley disappeared, and the subsequent attempts to cover his tracks. James urged the jury to consider the overwhelming evidence and deliver justice for Riley. In his closing arguments, Prosecutor Dan James delivered a chilling reminder to the jury of how long it takes for someone to die from suffocation or strangulation. He emphasized that during those agonizing moments, the killer would have had ample time to stop, but chose not to, underscoring the deliberate and cruel nature of the act. As the trial drew to a close, the jurors were instructed on their responsibilities, including an important decision. If they found Andy guilty of first-degree murder, they would have the option of attaching mercy to his sentence. This meant the difference between the possibility of parole after serving a minimum term or a sentence without any chance of release. The weight of this choice loomed heavily over the courtroom as the jury prepared to deliberate. If mercy was attached to Andy's sentence, it would mean he could become eligible for parole in just 15 years. However, before the jury left the courtroom to deliberate on this critical decision, Riley's father, Lance, took the stand. His testimony was raw and emotional, giving a voice to the profound grief and loss felt by Riley's family. Lance's words were a heartfelt plea for justice, urging the jury to consider the lasting impact of Andy's actions on their lives as they weighed the question of mercy. Andy's defense attorneys worked diligently to clarify the implications of attaching mercy to his sentence. They emphasized to the jury that granting mercy did not guarantee Andy's release in 15 years. Instead, it would simply allow a parole board to review his case at that time. The decision to grant parole would depend on a thorough evaluation of his behavior, rehabilitation, and other factors. This argument aimed to soften the jury's perspective, portraying mercy as a measured option rather than an automatic path to freedom. After deliberating for less than 20 minutes, the jury returned with their verdict. Andy McCauley was found guilty of first-degree murder, death of a child by a custodian through child abuse, and concealing a body. The swift decision reflected the overwhelming evidence presented during the trial, leaving no doubt in the jurors' minds about Andy's guilt in the tragic and horrifying death of Riley Crossman. Unsurprisingly, the jury voted unanimously not to attach mercy to the verdict. As a result, Judge Deborah McLaughlin sentenced Andy McCauley to life without the possibility of parole on November 4, 2021. Andy remained stoic during the sentencing, refusing to make any statement as the final decision was read. After the trial, Riley's mother, Chantel, Prosecutor Dan James, and several officers and investigators who had worked tirelessly on the case expressed their disappointment that the death penalty was not an option under West Virginia law. They believed the severity and heinous nature of the crime warranted the harshest possible punishment. Andy McCauley is now serving his life sentence at the Mount Olive Correctional Complex in south-central West Virginia, where he will remain for the rest of his days. What do you think motivated Andy McCauley to commit such a horrific act? And do you believe justice was truly served in this case? Should the death penalty be an option for cases as horrifying as this one, even in states where it's not currently allowed? Thank you for watching this deep dive into the tragic case of Riley Crossman. Case 2. On the evening of September 17, 2023, the quiet suburban town of Romaville, Illinois became the scene of a deeply disturbing crime that shattered the sense of safety within the community. What began as a routine welfare check by local authorities quickly escalated into the discovery of a shocking act of violence that sent ripples of fear and disbelief throughout the nation. Inside a modest home on Concord Avenue, 31-year-old Zoraida Bartolome, her husband Alberto Roland, and their two young sons, 10-year-old Adriel and 7-year-old Diego, were found lifeless. It was an unimaginable tragedy that would leave investigators and the public searching for answers. What initially seemed to be an inexplicable event soon unraveled into a complex web of deception, manipulation, and premeditated harm. Okay, the deeper authorities dug, the more horrifying the truth became. This was not a random crime. It was the calculated result of an insidious plot fueled by jealousy, paranoia, and manipulation. The unsettling sequence of events began when concerned family members noticed something was off. Calls and text messages to Zoraida and Alberto went unanswered for hours, an unusual and troubling sign. Zoraida's mother and sister grew increasingly anxious as the silence stretched on, knowing that the couple was always quick to respond. Even more alarming was the fact that Alberto had failed to show up for his shift at work, a highly uncharacteristic absence that further fueled their growing fear. Unable to shake their dread, the family contacted the Romeoville Police Department, urging them to check on the household. And he never, he's always at work. Officers arrived at the family's residence on Concord Avenue that evening, expecting to conduct a simple wellness check. But as they approached the house, an unsettling silence engulfed the property. The home, usually bustling with life, was eerily still. The absence of movement inside the house sent a shiver down their spines. Peering through the windows, officers immediately noticed signs of disorder. Furniture was overturned, a television lay broken on the floor, and various objects were scattered in disarray. Something was very wrong. The officers decided to enter the home, not knowing that what they were about to witness would haunt them forever. Inside, they were met with an unspeakable tragedy. 2 dogs, the family's beloved pets, lay motionless near the entryway, a grim prelude to the scene that awaited them. As they ventured deeper into the house, the true extent of what had occurred became painfully clear. The scene was one of unimaginable sadness and despair. Alberto was found in the hallway, his body showing multiple wounds, with his phone lying just inches from his hand, as if he had been trying to call for help in his final moments. Investigators later determined that he had been harmed first, leaving him no time to react or defend himself. The manner in which he was targeted suggested that whoever was responsible had planned this act meticulously, ensuring that he would not be able to escape or fight back. In the bedroom, Zoraida's lifeless body was discovered, her hands covering her face, an instinctive reaction to an unimaginable horror. The position of her body, along with forensic analysis, indicated that she had witnessed what had happened to her husband before she, too, became a victim. The psychological toll of her final moments was unfathomable. She had been a mother, a wife, a daughter, and a sister, and in those moments she had been powerless to protect herself or her children. But perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery was that of the children, Adriel and Diego. The 2 young boys had been found in their beds, seemingly unaware of what had transpired. Their room, which should have been a place of warmth, safety, and laughter, was now a heartbreaking testament to an unthinkable act. Their toys lay untouched, their blankets still neatly covering their bodies as if they had been peacefully asleep, unaware of the danger lurking in their home. The innocence of Zoraida had been shattered in an instant, leaving the community reeling with grief. Shell casings littered the floor, over 2 dozen in total. The calculated nature of the act, the lack of forced entry, and the deliberate attempt to stage the scene as a burglary quickly led investigators to dismiss the notion of a random home invasion. This was a targeted attack, one that had been executed with precision and without hesitation. But who would want this family harmed and why? Preliminary investigation leads police to believe this happened between 9 p.m. on Saturday and 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. We are not asking anybody to shelter in place. We are not actively looking for anybody in the area, but we do always ask our residents to have a good sense of self-awareness and to report anything that they might see as suspicious. As authorities began their investigation, they uncovered a chilling pattern of threats leading up to the incident. Zoraida had confided in a coworker that she had been receiving ominous messages in the weeks before her passing. Messages warning her to stay away from someone. These messages were anonymous, filled with cryptic wording, and conveyed a sense of imminent danger. The coworker had urged her to report them, but she had downplayed their severity, never imagining that they would escalate into something so devastating. Alberto, too, had received a terrifying message just days before the incident. An anonymous sender warned him, "This will be the last time I say this, Alberto. This situation will cost you your family." The wording was deliberate, as if it had been designed to instill fear and compliance. He had shared his concerns with a close friend, questioning whether these were just empty threats or something more sinister. He had no idea that his life and the lives of his family were already in grave danger. It was now clear. The family had been marked, but the most pressing question remained. Who was behind these threats, and what had driven them to such extremes? With this information, investigators turned their focus to Nathaniel Nate Huey Jr., a local security company owner. He had a past that was more complicated than it seemed. "So when you guys, are you married? So like church married but not paper married?" Despite running a business focused on protection, Nate was legally barred from owning firearms due to a prior conviction. His background, which included legal troubles and allegations of controlling behavior, painted a picture of a man with a complex and troubling history. When questioned by police, Nate admitted to having an affair with Sarita, but denied any involvement in the incident. He described her as his angel and insisted he would never have harmed her. However, his demeanor was inconsistent, shifting from defensiveness to visible agitation whenever investigators pressed him on his whereabouts during the night of the crime. "I don't know. I mean, did she ever tell you like, I'm worried I'm scared of my husband, or I'm worried I'm scared of a neighbor? Nice easygoing guy, but like just kind of one of those things that like, she's not ahead, so it's, but like he was good. When you say you guys were gonna like move forward, were you guys like actively looking to try to get a place together or something? Yeah, it was like, it was slow. It was kind of like, it was only a couple of months kind of thing. So yeah, it was just like, I don't know how to explain it. No, I get it. I want to explain it better. Yeah. No, I get it. His statements lacked clarity, and his attempt to provide an alibi fell apart under scrutiny. But his story quickly unraveled. His alibi was weak, and surveillance footage placed his vehicle near the crime scene during the estimated time of the events. Further investigation into his phone records showed suspicious activity, including deleted messages and multiple calls made in the early hours of the morning. What we're asking for is consent to get the text messages off your phone between you and her to Snapchat or whatever it is between years. We have both sides of it trying to eliminate you as a suspect, but you can get it out of the computer. No, we have to take the phone. We plug it in, we take it out, and we give your phone back. That's even better. No, I believe you, but well, yeah, just let me see it. And why I asked is the bosses called right away. They were like, we'd like to see if we can get the stuff, from your end back that way and see if maybe your husband got wind of it and pulled it off. So we just want to take a look. On our side of it, we can get a search warrant, to go through the phone and just take a little longer. But the fastest way would be consent. Pull it off and get your phone back. Then it would be and again, I explained to you earlier, I'm trying to eliminate you. We have a deceased girl, and her last slang or boyfriend or whatever is you. And I'm sure that, if you're an outsider looking in, who's your suspect? And so I'd like to eliminate that. I'd like to say, well, no, we looked through stuff. He didn't have nothing to do with it. We're done with it. Go on the computer. I agree with you. But again, it would take us, a couple hours to pull information out of the phone that could eliminate you as a suspect, like right from the start. It's up to you. Yeah, it feels like you're pretty suspected. How about this? How about I come to you guys later today after work or something like that? Because I got a fucking audition in there that I don't necessarily want you to be like looking at. You know what I'm saying? I understand. But again, I promise you, I don't care what you look at. No. It's not like fucking like freak shit like that. One last thing before we drive out of the parking lot. Will you give us consent to look in your Denali, just for like blood or something? Oh, there's no blood in my car. I believe you. So now we're at the point where we just got to check off everything off our list, so that there's, like I said, you're in a relationship with her, and that's what we're going off of. Okay, yeah, and we want to be as thorough as possible. And part of being thorough is that we just want to take a look inside. That's just the route that I would rather go this. I don't mean any disrespect. I promise you that. I'm just saying I think it's just better if at this point, not speak to him. This is insane. It's crazy. Yeah, I get you. No, I get you. I don't doubt that you can do your homework. I want you to do your homework. What I'm just telling you, like you said, this fucking 4 people have been fucking hurt. So I want to make sure that I'm not fucking walking myself on some shit. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. It's kind of alarming just because you guys have come back so many times. Trust me, we didn't want to do that. Bosses told us to do it. We weren't looking forward to doing that. We just unfortunately got stuck doing it. So, we're gonna go. Like I said, you got my card. If you could really stop by today, we'll help out a lot. Get you off our list so we can be done with that. I'll bring the fucking card. I'm not going to watch it though. There's nothing like you can swab and shit and everything. You will see there's nothing in my card. I believe you, dude. I believe you, man. We want to solve this more than anybody, dude. No, it's not really, I need to say I believe. As authorities examined his past, they discovered something even more alarming. He was not acting alone. There was another individual who had been playing a far more sinister role in orchestrating the events that led to this tragedy. Investigators initially suspected that Nathaniel Nate Huey Jr. had acted alone. However, as they delved deeper, they uncovered an even more sinister presence behind the entire ordeal. Hermelinda Palomo, Nate's fiancée. Hello. Hi, Hermelinda. My name is Detective Garcia from the Romero Police Department. This is Detective Wagner. I know you know what's going on and why you're here. Okay. I know you were talking on the phone with your husband right now. Does he live here with you? How long have you guys been together? 2015. Okay. We're investigating a murder. Okay. So, we have in our possession some phones. Okay. And in those phones, we're doing what is called a phone dump. So what happens is if anybody's talking on a text app that you can download, for example, Text Now, we can retrieve those messages. Okay. We have retrieved those messages. All right. We've read them. We're pretty clear that somebody's pretty upset at the victim. Okay. Is there any way that these text messages are going to come back to you? Or your name, or your phone, or anything associated with that? Okay. Okay. For over a year, her Melinda had manipulated Nate into believing he was the target of an international crime syndicate. Through a network of fake phone numbers, anonymous messages, and fabricated online personas, she convinced him that dangerous individuals were surveilling him, and that Zoraida was a traitor who had put him in danger. She meticulously planted the seed of paranoia in his mind, feeding him lies until he felt he had no other option but to act. Why are you scared of him? Oh, I'm not scared. Okay. Why are you scared right now? Because when I called him because I was scared, I didn't know where he was. He said, someone's following me. Okay. So I called and I called. And then I heard him say, why are you following me? Do you want to search the car? And then someone said to him, there are messages from you. And it's because her husband found out you were having an affair. And I didn't know that. You didn't know what? That he was having an affair. Okay. When did you find that out right now? Just right now. Okay. Okay. When's the last time that he had an affair? Because I know this is not the first time. No, it's not. Okay. When's the last time you knew he had an affair? When we first started dating. 2015? From 15 to maybe 17. You believe he's had multiple or many affairs while you two have been together. I was hoping that they were done because I was hoping to trust, because you have to when you find out about them, like what happens. You guys get into arguments? Do you talk to the women that he's having affairs with? No, for what? I don't know, leave your man alone kind of thing. No, I'm too old for that. I'm 50 years old. There's no reason for me to no, and quite honestly, it's not the female's fault. It's his fault. Right. So no. Text message records and social media interactions revealed a calculated effort by her Melinda to maintain complete control over Nate's perception of reality. What about a man by the name of Alberto Rolón? Have I ever heard of a man? No. Okay. Have you ever met Zoraida? No. Have you seen a picture of her? No. So that name comes up to you because you saw it. Well, really, that name stuck in my head because that night I thought, are you cheating on me? Was the person calling? They're calling in. Okay. More than once. And it was a long name. I thought it was Bartholomew, actually. It was a long name. So when we asked your husband if he knew this person, Zoraida, he said, I've never heard of that name. Why would he be lying to us? I don't know. I don't know. Should I believe him? I don't know. Please don't tell him I told you. We're not going to tell him anything. I don't. I thought that you guys said to him he was having an affair. Somebody said he's having an affair. Okay. Well, that is probably very accurate. You guys are here for something else, and I'm making it about cheating, and it's not. Well, I mean, it could be. So are you guys saying that you're trying to find out if he killed the husband? We're trying to find out who was involved. So we're talking to everyone. We're talking to you. We're talking to him. We're talking to other people. Because as you may be aware, people like to the police, right? So we don't know who's lying. What I would like to ask you is either Friday or Saturday night, did he go out with his friends? No. Did he work? Friday night? No, he was with me. Saturday night? No. She convinced him that he was constantly being watched, that Zoraida had betrayed him, and that if he did not act soon, his own life would be in jeopardy. Investigators later discovered that she had gone as far as using burner phones to send threatening messages to Nate, pretending to be members of a fictitious criminal organization. Did you go anywhere Saturday night then? No, I was home. Well, it wasn't night, it was afternoon. No, I did not. I was here. I understand this is not about an affair, but for me, it's about an affair. I don't know what day you guys are looking at, but for me, he was home all weekend. Thursday to today. He comes, he goes to work, he comes home. Do you think he's capable of taking someone's life? No. I'm sorry. I know. How sure are you of that? You know, Nate has a lot of things, but what he tries to do is to calm people down and stop them from fighting. So for him to just actually fight with someone, no. Remember when we first met you at the door? I told you that we had some text messages with phone numbers, and we're going to find out who those phone numbers belong to. Is there any reason why those numbers will come back to you? Are you sure? Are those my numbers? I don't know that yet. We're looking into it. But what I'm saying is there any reason why they would come back to you? No. As the walls closed in, Nate and Melinda realized they could no longer evade capture. Instead of surrendering, they chose to flee. They were tracked to Oklahoma, where they were seen purchasing burner phones, hair dye, and other items intended to alter their appearance. The evidence indicated that they were making desperate attempts to avoid detection. Authorities quickly closed in on them, leading to a dramatic high-speed pursuit on Interstate 44. Nate, behind the wheel, recklessly maneuvered through traffic in a last-ditch effort to escape. The chase ended in a catastrophic crash, rendering their vehicle disabled. As law enforcement officers approached, they made a devastating discovery. Nate and Melinda had taken drastic actions to avoid capture. Even though the primary suspects were no longer a threat, investigators continued unraveling the deeply unsettling layers of the case. What they found was nothing short of haunting. Melinda's psychological manipulation had turned Nate into a pawn in her elaborate scheme. She fabricated threats, created an illusion of danger, and led him to believe that eliminating Zoraida and her family was his only chance for survival. Melinda's influence over Nate was profound, revealing how deep psychological control can lead to devastating consequences. She orchestrated events from the shadows, weaponizing paranoia and deception to manipulate him into carrying out actions he might never have considered on his own. This tragic case stands as a grim reminder of how dangerous psychological coercion can be when left unchecked. The Romeoville case left a deep scar on the community. A family was lost, not to random violence, but to a meticulously planned web of lies and deceit. The heartbreak lingers, and for the town of Romeoville, the impact of this tragedy will never be forgotten. This case serves as a powerful reminder of how psychological manipulation can drive individuals to commit unthinkable acts. It underscores the importance of recognizing signs of control and coercion before they escalate into tragedy. Communities must remain vigilant, supporting those who may be vulnerable to such influences and ensuring that justice prevails. Case 3. March 23, 2019, 16-year-old Angela went to a gathering, promising her parents she would be back by evening. She was headed to a celebration among familiar faces, a place that seemed safe, where nothing unexpected should have happened. But as night fell, she stopped responding. Calls went unanswered, and the people who had spent the evening with her acted strangely, as if nothing had happened, or, on the contrary, as if they were trying to hide something. Late at night, her parents received a call that was supposed to explain their daughter's disappearance, but instead, it only led to more questions. Stories didn't match, details didn't form a clear picture, and every new fact contradicted the last. Those who had been with Angela struggled with their words. Some said too little, others too much. What really happened that night? Why didn't anyone start looking for her right away? What were the people around her hiding? This disappearance became a chain of mysteries, where every new answer only created more questions. Let's take a closer look at this case. Anela Aguirre was born in 2002 into a family filled with love and care. Her parents, Anel Daniel Aguirre and Yerlisha Garay, worked hard to provide their children with everything they needed. Her father, an engineer at a government company, was a strict but fair man who always prioritized his family's well-being. Her mother, a hairstylist, ran a small salon from home, where neighbors and sometimes even Anela's friends would stop by. Their home was never quiet. Laughter, conversations, and the sounds of everyday life created a warm and welcoming atmosphere that felt unshakable. Angela's older sister, Natalie, was more than just family. She was her closest friend. They shared secrets, talked about their future, and gave each other advice. In her free time, Angela enjoyed helping her mother in the salon. She loved experimenting with makeup, creating new looks, and sometimes doing manicures for her friends, who were always impressed by her skills. Angela had many friends. She was quick to connect with people, had a natural charm, and always knew how to lighten the mood. Energetic, cheerful, and kind-hearted, she was loved for her sincerity and openness. But despite her easygoing nature, she also had a thoughtful side. She often reflected on her future, what career to choose, and how to achieve success. Her parents taught their children the value of hard work, kindness, and helping those around them. Their home was a place where everyone felt welcome and supported. No one could have imagined that this warm and happy world would one day be shattered by a devastating tragedy. José Alberto Chedino came from a wealthy family. His father was a businessman, and his mother had strong connections in elite social circles. Because of this, he had access to privileges that most of his peers could only dream of. He had expensive possessions, exclusive club memberships, and the freedom to travel and enjoy luxuries that were out of reach for many. Angela met him through mutual friends. They started spending time in the same social circles about 3 years earlier. At first, she didn't pay much attention to him, but over time, their casual friendship became more frequent. For Angela, he was just a friend, someone to have fun with in a group setting. But José Alberto saw her differently. He was persistent. He frequently asked her to hang out, sent her messages, and always found excuses to be around her. But Angela never felt the same way. To her, he was just a friend, and his advances made her uncomfortable. Her close friends knew that he had asked her out multiple times, but she always turned him down. One evening, at a gathering with mutual friends, something happened that made Angela uneasy. While hanging out by the pool, her friends playfully pushed her into the water. Soaked, she asked José Alberto to help her find something dry to change into. At that moment, he suggested they go somewhere private, hinting at something more. Angela immediately refused. From that point on, she became more distant toward him, avoiding personal conversations. Over time, her discomfort around José Alberto grew. She confided in her friends, saying that he was becoming too persistent. They reassured her, telling her to ignore him. But Angela could sense that his interest wasn't fading. Even so, she continued to interact with him. Not because she wanted to, but because their social circles overlapped, making it difficult to completely avoid him. On March 23, 2019, Angela Aguirre woke up with excitement. That day, her best friend was celebrating a birthday, and she wanted to attend the party. She had discussed it with her parents in advance, but when it came time to ask for permission, she received a firm no. The reason was simple. Her friend lived in a neighborhood that wasn't considered safe, and her parents didn't want to put their daughter at risk. Angela tried to persuade them, offering to be driven there by car, but her mother and father remained firm in their decision. Disappointed, she messaged her friends, venting about her parents' strict rules. That same morning, she received a message from José Alberto Chedino. It was his birthday, too, and he invited her to celebrate with him. He suggested starting the night at a private club and then heading to La Taraquea Island, a secluded spot that could only be reached by boat. Angela hesitated. After being unable to attend the first party, this was her chance to still spend the evening with friends, and she decided to accept the invitation. But there was a problem. If she told her parents the truth, that the party would take place on an island, they would likely say no. So she chose to leave out some details. That evening, when she spoke to her parents about her plans, she reassured them that the gathering would be in a safe place. She emphasized that an adult chaperone, a relative of the birthday host, would be present, and that it would be a small, private event. Her parents hesitated, but after having already refused her earlier that day, they didn't want to disappoint their daughter again. They knew José Alberto and understood that they couldn't keep Anela completely isolated from her peers. After much convincing, her father agreed, but under strict conditions: no alcohol, frequent phone check-ins, and returning home at the agreed-upon time. As evening approached, Anela got ready for the night. She stood in front of the mirror, carefully choosing her outfit. At first, she considered wearing a dress, but then decided on something more comfortable: shorts and a light blouse, perfect for an outdoor party. She braided her hair neatly and applied light makeup. The drive to the club took about 15 minutes. Her father remained mostly quiet, but before they arrived, he reminded her once again, "If anything feels off, call me immediately." When they pulled up, a small group of people had already gathered outside the club. Anela couldn't enter without a chaperone, so she waited. A few minutes later, José Alberto arrived. He was relaxed, smiling, and greeted Anela without acknowledging her father. Before leaving, she quickly said goodbye, gave her father a kiss on the cheek, and walked away with her friend. It was the last time her parents would see her alive. When Anela met up with José Alberto outside the club, he suggested heading to La Taraquea Island almost immediately. The island, located in the middle of the Caroni River, was secluded and could only be reached by boat. He assured her that the real party was happening there, that their group was already gathered, and that they could have fun without any restrictions. He promised it was safe, that no strangers would be there, only people he trusted. He didn't give Anela much time to think. He told her the boat was already waiting, and that if she truly wanted to enjoy the night, she shouldn't say no. Her options were to either go along with the group or stay behind alone, which would have seemed strange to those around her. She chose to go. At the dock, the boat was waiting. The boat that would take them to the island belonged to Jose Alberto's godfather, Jose Zorilla. He was the oldest among them, a well-known businessman who, despite his age, maintained close ties with younger crowds and often hosted events like this. On board were several others, his son Bloomberg's girlfriend Jocelyn Barrero, and two family friends, Orlando Salazar and Wilmer Diaz. All of them were significantly older than Anela. As the boat pulled away, leaving the city lights behind, the passengers laughed, talked loudly, and speculated about how the night would unfold. Bottles of alcohol were already being passed around freely, with no concern for moderation. La Terraquea Island was known as a party spot. There were no permanent structures, but it had been set up specifically for gatherings. A bar, a dance floor, and lounge areas had been arranged to accommodate large groups. It was a place where no one monitored what was happening. When the boat reached the shore, the group made their way toward the center of the island, where music was blasting, tables were set up with drinks, and the air was thick with the of alcohol and tobacco. The atmosphere was lively. People were dancing, others sat at tables, some were laughing, while a few already seemed intoxicated. The group quickly blended into the festivities. Drinks flowed freely, glasses were constantly refilled, and no one was keeping track of how much anyone consumed. Anela was surrounded by people. Someone was always raising a toast with her, pulling her into conversations, and encouraging her to enjoy the night. Time passed, the music grew louder, and the party showed no signs of slowing down. People moved between the bar and the dance floor, relaxed in lounge areas, and made plans for the rest of the night. At some point, Jose Alberto began staying closer to Anela. He made sure she was never alone, continuously engaging her in conversation and offering her more drinks. The night became increasingly chaotic, there was no structure, and no one was in control of what was happening. The group continued celebrating, losing track of time and their surroundings. People began dispersing throughout the island. Some kept dancing, others wandered off into the darkness. The party on La Terraquea Island lasted well into the night, becoming more disorganized as time passed. Guests moved chaotically, blending into the crowd. The music was deafening, alcohol consumption continued unchecked, and no one was paying attention to the time. In such a setting, it was difficult to track who was coming and going, who was talking to whom, or even who remained on the island. The last confirmed sighting of Anela was shortly before midnight. She had been moving between the dance floor, the bar, and the shoreline, socializing and drinking. Then, at some point, she vanished from sight. Several people later said that Anela might have just stepped away for some quiet time, away from the noise. This didn't raise any concerns at first, since guests frequently wandered off around the island, relaxed by the water, or found quieter spots. However, as time passed, it became clear that she was nowhere to be found. No one could pinpoint exactly when Anela disappeared, but at the time, no one made an effort to find out what had happened to her. Some partygoers claimed they assumed she had left early or taken a boat back with someone else, yet no one bothered to check if that was actually the case. No one searched the area, called out her name, or even sent her a message. By then, her phone was no longer responding, but no one took this as a sign of concern. At some point, the party started winding down, people were exhausted, the music had faded, and guests were gradually leaving. That's when it became evident Anela was missing. But still, no one actively looked for her. No calls were made to her parents, and no one reported that she had disappeared. Perhaps those present didn't want to draw attention or feared the consequences. Under the influence of alcohol, they chose not to dig too deep into the situation. Each person assumed someone else would handle it, but in the end, no one did anything. When the group finally decided to leave the island, no one stayed behind to search for Anela. Not a single person suggested waiting until sunrise, checking the area, or scanning the river. The boat, filled with the remaining guests, pulled away from the shore and headed back, leaving the dark, silent island behind. Anela Aguirre's parents were anxiously waiting for 8 p.m., the time they were supposed to pick her up from the party. Her father left early, driving to the parking lot of the club where Anela had said the gathering would take place. As soon as he arrived, he called her to let her know he was there. The phone rang, but there was no answer. He waited a few minutes and tried again. Same result. At first, he didn't panic. He assumed she might not have heard the call because of the music or had left her phone in her bag. He remained patient, glancing at the clock, but with every passing minute, his worry grew stronger. He kept dialing her number over and over, but she never picked up. After 30 minutes, he decided to call his wife to check if Anela had reached out to her. She answered with a worried voice, saying she hadn't heard from their daughter since she left the house earlier that evening. Realizing that Anela wasn't at the club, her parents started calling her friends, hoping someone could tell them where she was. However, none of them knew that she had never actually been at the club that night. Desperate for answers, they tried to get in touch with other party guests, but they couldn't find anyone who had useful information. They didn't understand what was happening, but they knew something was very wrong. Over the next few hours, they called Anela 56 times, but her phone remained unreachable. Around 2 a.m., their phone rang. An unknown number appeared on the screen. Her father picked up immediately, hoping to hear his daughter's voice, but instead it was Jose Alberto's mother. She uttered a sentence that felt like a nightmare. She fell off the boat. In that moment, Anela's parents' world collapsed. They had no idea what boat she was talking about. Anela had said she was at a party in a club. How could she have ended up on the water? They demanded an explanation, but the woman sounded hesitant, as if she herself wasn't entirely sure what had happened. Something didn't feel right. Their instincts told them that this situation was far more serious than they were being led to believe. Why were they only hearing about this now? Why had no one called earlier? If their daughter had fallen into the water, why hadn't anyone raised the alarm immediately? Every answer they received only deepened their fear. They knew something terrible had happened, but they had yet to realize just how devastating the truth would be. After receiving the late-night call from Jose Alberto's mother, Anela's parents knew their worst fears were coming true. They didn't know the full story yet, but one thing was clear. The situation was critical. Their daughter was missing, and no one had made an effort to find her. They clung to the hope that if they acted quickly, there was still a chance to save her. At 4 a.m., without wasting a second, they went to the police and demanded an immediate search operation, but instead of urgency, they were met with indifference. The officers on duty explained that officially, a person is not considered missing until 72 hours have passed, and until then, no active search would take place. They were told to wait. Maybe she had just lost track of time. Maybe her phone battery had died. Maybe she was simply out having fun and hadn't realized how late it was. But her parents knew better. They knew Anela would never disappear like this, and every passing moment without action meant losing precious time that could have saved her. This version of events seemed absurd to Anela's parents. Their daughter had never disappeared without warning, never kept her phone off for this long, and never broke her agreements with them. But the police weren't listening. Her parents knew that if they sat back and waited, precious time would be lost. So they took matters into their own hands. Her father's first move was to go to Jose Alberto's family home, demanding answers. He wanted to know who had been with his daughter, where she had last been seen, and who had actually witnessed her falling from the boat. But the responses he received were vague and evasive. Meanwhile, Anela's mother was calling all of her daughter's friends, hoping that someone could tell her where she had been at the moment she vanished. But no one even knew that she had been on the island. That confirmed their worst fear. Anela had intentionally kept her real plans a secret from everyone. Realizing that phone calls alone wouldn't be enough, the parents turned to social media for help. By 6 a.m., they began posting online, sharing their daughter's photo, her description, and the last known location where she had been seen. They begged anyone with information to come forward. The posts quickly spread, people shared them, sent messages of support, and some even volunteered to help in the search. Several people, after seeing the posts, recalled that they had seen a large group on the island the night before. They remembered young men and women partying, drinking, and among them, a girl who looked like Anela. At the time, no one thought much of it. Now, those sightings carried a much darker meaning. Anela's parents knew they couldn't wait for the authorities to take action. They went straight to the dock, where the boat had departed for the island. There, they tried to question staff about who had been operating the vessel, and whether any unusual activity had been reported. But once again, they were met with silence. It turned out that no one had been keeping track of the boat's trips that night. No patrols had recorded any departures after 5 p.m., even though nighttime travel on the water was officially prohibited. While the parents desperately searched for any clue, social media erupted. Anela's story gained massive attention, sparking outrage. People demanded answers, called for immediate search efforts, and flooded police pages with comments urging action. Despite the authorities' inaction, Anela's family pushed forward with their own investigation. They gathered a group of volunteers and started searching the riverbanks, knowing that every minute counted. But the truth they were about to uncover was far worse than anything they could have imagined. The search for Anela Aguirre lasted 3 days. However, on March 26th, all hope was shattered. At 7 a.m., local fishermen spotted a body floating near the riverbank, caught in the branches. It was found several miles upstream from the location where, according to the group, Anela had fallen from the boat. News of the discovery quickly reached the authorities. Soon after, an investigative team arrived at the scene, and within hours, Anela's parents received the confirmation they had been dreading. The body belonged to their daughter. The initial examination only raised more questions. Anela was still wearing a wetsuit and a life jacket, making the possibility of an accidental drowning highly unlikely. Official reports stated that if she had truly fallen overboard, the river's current would have carried her downstream. However, her body was found in the opposite direction, contradicting the laws of hydrodynamics. This meant she could not have drowned in the location described by the witnesses. The first forensic analysis revealed multiple signs of physical trauma. Bruises and lacerations were found on her head and face, indicating severe blunt force impact. Additionally, there were indications of aggressive assault. The official cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation due to drowning, but the report suggested she may have been unconscious before entering the water. Anela's parents were devastated. They had known something was wrong, but could never have imagined the full extent of the horror. The authorities remained slow to comment, and the police avoided giving direct answers. However, the Aguirre family refused to stay silent. They made a public plea, demanding justice and accountability for those responsible. Meanwhile, as news of the forensic findings spread across social media, public outrage erupted. Many people began to suspect that there was an effort to cover up the case and protect those involved. But Anela's family was determined to fight for the truth. The first forensic report following Anela Aguirre's discovery left little room for doubt. She had suffered physical trauma, sustained head injuries, and lost consciousness before drowning. However, these findings quickly became inconvenient for certain individuals. Just 2 days after the autopsy results became public, authorities announced a second forensic examination. This time, the conclusions were completely different. The new report stated that there were no signs of foul play, and that all injuries had supposedly occurred in the water due to impact with rocks. The official cause of death was revised to an unfortunate accident. The findings suggested that Anela had fallen into the water on her own, and that her life jacket may have malfunctioned. This conclusion sparked widespread outrage. Anela's parents didn't believe a single word. They couldn't accept how the official version of events had completely changed within just a few days. How could the injuries on her body be explained? Why did the first forensic report confirm aggression, while the second one dismissed it entirely? But the biggest question, one being asked not just by the family but by the entire country, was, how could someone wearing a life jacket drown? There were no answers. Anela's parents openly accused the authorities of corruption. They claimed that someone was protecting those responsible by using their influence and power. They demanded an independent investigation and a new forensic analysis conducted by international experts. At the same time, social media erupted with renewed outrage. People were convinced that there had been an attempt to cover up the case, that powerful figures had intervened to make the evidence disappear. The protests were no longer limited to the online space. Public pressure was building. Anela's parents refused to back down. They knew they weren't just fighting for their daughter, but for the countless other families whose cases had been left unresolved in a system plagued by corruption and impunity. The overwhelming attention surrounding the case drew the interest of journalists. Independent media outlets launched their own investigations, publishing reports exposing corruption within the Venezuelan justice system. Discrepancies in witness statements, suspicious alterations in documents, and the unexplained disappearance of key evidence were all brought to light. The tipping point came when a major independent news outlet published explosive findings. The families of the suspects had allegedly attempted to bribe the legal system. Evidence suggested that $100,000 in cash and 3 kilograms of gold had been offered in exchange for closing the case. This revelation ignited public fury. People demanded resignations, arrests, and justice. The protests were no longer just digital. Citizens took to the streets. Anela's case was no longer just a tragic story. It had become a symbol of the fight against corruption and impunity. After months of relentless public pressure, Anela Aguirre's case finally reached the courts. But Venezuelan authorities made an unusual decision. The trial would be held in secrecy. Journalists, activists, and even the victim's family were denied access to the proceedings. Case 4. Klondike Valakanovich Bishimbayev was born in 1980 on April 11th in the city of Zalorda in the Kazakh SSR. He was the eldest of 2 children in the family of the deputy of the Majilis of the Parliament of the 5th Convocation, Valakanovich Bishimbayev, and his wife Almira Nurlibakova. Klondike's mother became an entrepreneur in the 1990s. Before the high-profile arrest of her son, she owned several large companies, but in 2024 she promptly got rid of most of them, reissuing them to relatives so that all the assets still remained with the Bishimbayev family. In 2018, when a corruption case was brought against her son, the woman acted as his public defender. When the prosecution asked for a 12-year prison sentence for the defendant, Almira called such a sentence destruction of the personality of her son. Klondike grew up together with his younger sister named Arujin, who was born in 1984. The man received 3 higher educations. He studied at the Kazakh Academy of Management, then earned a degree from Taraz University, and later became a recipient of the Presidential Scholarship Program at George Washington University in the United States. At the age of 26, he defended his PhD thesis in economic sciences. In 2000, Klondike started his career as a manager in a bank. He briefly interned at the Ministry of Economy, and then held senior positions in large companies for several years before returning to the ministry. In 2016, he himself became the head of the Ministry of Economy, becoming one of the youngest high-ranking officials in Kazakhstan. However, just 8 months later, he was dismissed with a great scandal and found himself in prison on the fact of multiple bribes, in especially large amounts. The man was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but was released on parole only a year later. He officially apologized to the then head of state Nursultan Nazarbayev, and the latter pardoned him. Personal life of Klondike Bishimbayev. Before meeting the future victim, the defendant twice entered into official marriages. His first wife was Agrim Raimbakova, whom he married back in 1999 when he was a student. In 2000, the couple had a common son, who was named Alice Kondar Valakin. But in 2004, this union broke up. In 2006, while serving as an advisor to the Minister of Economy and Budget Planning of the Republic of Kazakhstan, the man married for the second time. This time, his chosen one was Nazim Kakerman Babagulova, with whom he lived in marriage for 14 years. 3 children were born in this union. In 2020, the spouses divorced on the initiative of the woman, who was Sultanat Nukanova. Sultanat Amanjaldinovna Nukanova was born in 1992, on May 15th, in the city of Pavlodar, located in the northern part of Kazakhstan. She was the youngest of 2 children in the family of businessman Amanjaldi Nukanov and his wife, economist Jumagul. The woman's paternal uncle, Kairat Nukanov, built a brilliant career in politics, headed the regional department of entrepreneurship and trade, and he was also the head of the cities of Ekabastas and Aksu. As a schoolgirl, little Sultanat became seriously interested in astrology. The girl studied profile literature in detail, made horoscopes and natal charts for her friends and classmates. Surprisingly, but she managed to create fairly accurate predictions which, for the most part, came true. At some point, she decided to turn her hobby into a lifelong endeavor, and success did not take long to come. Nukanova promoted astrological services in social networks. She conducted personal and online consultations, made short-term and long-term forecasts, helped others in achieving their goals, choosing a profession and spiritual development. The astrologer also gave advice in love affairs, tested people for compatibility, and helped to sort out relationships. It is noteworthy that her clients were exclusively women and girls. Sultanat quickly achieved financial independence. She earned decent money doing what she loved, what she knew, and what brought her pleasure. She gained a large number of followers on social networks. Her services were in great demand, and her consultations were scheduled for several months in advance. She was living the life she dreamed of and always aspired to, a persistent fan. In the spring of 2022, Bishimbayev accidentally stumbled upon Nukanova's page in one of the popular social networks. He liked the young beauty very much, and he decided to write to her, having thought of nothing better than to sign up to her for astrological consultation. However, she turned him down, pointing out that she only provides services to women, but such a turn only fueled the man's interest. The politician persistently tried to get the attention of the charming shade, showered her with compliments, and even tried to pity her, convincing her that only she can help him, and only she is trusted as a specialist astrologer. Sultanat was flattered by this, but still, she stubbornly refused to meet with an obsessive man who was unpleasant and even irritating to her. Repeatedly, the astrologer offered him an online consultation, but the man was adamant. For several months, the politician did not leave attempts to ask the beauty on a date. During this time, he managed to find out almost everything about her, where she lives, with whom she communicates, where she goes, what she is fond of, and so on. Sultanat still refused to meet him, but told her friends that she had a certain persistent admirer. Eventually, Sultanat gave in and agreed to a business meeting for face-to-face counseling. The man made every effort to make a good impression on her, was polite, behaved correctly and courteously, but that first meeting was just the beginning. However, in a frank conversation with her brother, Sultanat claimed that this man was not her type, and they will definitely not work out. At first, the behavior of the ex-minister did not cause much concern to either Sultanat herself or her relatives. She was sure that she could keep her boyfriend at a distance, and relatives and friends knew that this strong and self-sufficient young lady could not be forced to do anything against her will. But in another month, the situation began to change rapidly. Quandek managed to literally find a gap in the armor of the beauty, getting close to her through the oldest member of the family. The man expressed a desire to talk to the grandmother of his chosen one and ask for her blessing, motivated by the fact that if ever Sultanat changes her mind and agrees to become his wife, with her parents he will have time to talk, but the grandmother may no longer be. Without exaggeration, we can say that this gesture touched Sultanat, but she still refused to have a relationship with the politician. Unexpected wedding in the fall of 2022, Sultanat visited the house of her parents in Pavlodar and talked about the so far in her personal life no serious changes are not expected. She confessed to her brother that she was confused by the big age difference with Bishimbayev, which amounted to 12 years, that she was not attracted to him as a man at all, and according to the astrological calculations she made, they were not compatible at all. However, less than a month after that visit, Aitbek, leafing through his social network news feed, came across a post in which his sister wrote that Quandek had officially proposed to her and she had gladly accepted. Such news, to put it mildly, shocked the whole family, because it was a complete surprise. Friends of the woman were surprised no less, because recently she also told them that this is not the hero of her novel and nothing serious will not work out. Already in December 2022, just a few months after meeting, the couple played a luxurious wedding, organizing an expensive banquet in one of the most popular establishments in Astana. It is noteworthy that this marriage was not officially registered. The young people limited themselves to a special marriage rite performed in a mosque, but did not register their union in the registry office, and therefore they were considered civil spouses. At that time, Sultanat's attitude towards her chosen one changed dramatically. She constantly told her friends about how smart, educated, well-read and erudite he was, how he could easily and casually support a conversation on any topic. She also categorically denied his guilt in that high-profile corruption case for which he was imprisoned, albeit briefly. She claimed that he had been framed, and the man was in prison for someone else's crime. From the outside, the couple looked happy. The husband presented his beloved with gifts, and she called him the most golden husband, and claimed that she would never regret her decision to link her fate with him. Friends envied and sincerely rejoiced for the woman, believing that she was very lucky, but it did not last long. The first alarming signal. After the wedding, the newlyweds moved to live in the house of the parents of the spouse. Parents occupied the first floor, and the son and daughter-in-law settled on the second floor. Almira tried to surround her son's chosen one with love and care, often made her gifts, shielded her from routine housework, but she could not protect her from her son. Sultanat periodically came to visit her parents with her husband, but did not invite them to her home, because it irritated Bishimbayev and provoked quarrels. At first, none of her relatives knew about it, but less than a month after the wedding on New Year's Eve, Aitbek came to visit his sister and witnessed a terrible scene. A large festive table was set in the house, but the banquet was to be held in a small family circle. So when Quandek's cousin Quandek and his came to them and brought gifts to all family members, Sultanat did not have a return gift, which embarrassed her very much. But she quickly found a way out of the awkward situation, deciding to give the woman a bottle of expensive perfume, which the day before her husband bought her, but she had not yet had time to open it. However, her act did not just displease her spouse, but literally infuriated him. The man began to shout that she had no right to give the thing bought with his money, began to insult and call his wife names. The guests, seeing the heated situation, hurried to leave the house, and the parents, who tried to stand up for their daughter-in-law, were rudely stopped. To top it all off, the former politician, in a rage, overturned the table with all the treats and drinks on it, finally spoiling the New Year's Eve party. Beck was shocked by what he saw and did not know how to react. And the next day, in a telephone conversation, his sister confessed to him that her husband's behavior had changed a lot after the wedding, and she did not know what the reason was, but she hoped that the crisis would pass and everything would get better. Her brother suggested that she return home and break off the relationship, to which Sultanat replied with a categorical refusal, sophisticated domestic tyrant. 2.5 months after the incident, Sultanat Nukanova unexpectedly sent her brother some selfies. On them, she imprinted her face with terrible bruises and asked not to question her about anything. But the alarmed man tried to contact his sister, but she did not pick up the phone. So he called her husband, who offered to meet him for a man-to-man talk. At the meeting, Kwandek only told his wife's brother to mind his own business and refused to explain anything about the bruises on the woman's face. He also could not answer where she was, which gave him the most unpleasant thoughts. Fortunately, however, Sultanat was found in her parents' country apartment, to which she had the keys. Soon, Sultanat, despite the entreaties of loved ones, returned to her husband, arguing that she loved him and would do anything to save the marriage. For some time, the spouse behaved impeccably, gave her beloved gifts, and promised that he would change for her sake. They even went on a trip together to a popular Maldivian resort and looked very happy. However, later the photos from that vacation were admitted into evidence in court, because there are clearly visible bruises on the woman's body and fingerprints on her wrists, as if she was roughly grabbed by hands. According to Beck, neither to him nor to his parents, his sister has not complained about problems in the marriage since then, although her behavior and changes in appearance spoke for themselves. She lost a lot of weight, withdrew into herself, and began to wear more revealing outfits that apparently helped to hide the bruises and abrasions on her body. Moreover, the once successful astrologer and popular blogger stopped holding appointments and even giving online consultations. In social networks, she published only joint photos with her husband, telling how lucky she was and how much they love each other. As it later turned out, the husband simply forbade his wife to do what she loved, thus depriving her of a source of income, so that she was completely dependent on him. He also took control of all her movements and contacts. She could not meet with her friends without his permission, could not have lunch in a cafe without him. Even calls and messages on her phone were checked. Sultanat appeared everywhere only with Kwandek, who behaved in public as a loving and caring husband. Most of her friends had no idea about the horrors going on at home, and even envied such a family idol. From the outside, the union really looked flawless. Once a young woman, in a frank conversation, confessed to a close friend that she was subjected to total control from her husband, that he forbade her to work, and even to communicate with her parents without his knowledge, and also unjustifiably jealous, accused of cheating and constantly beat her. Upon hearing this, her friend was horrified and advised Nukanova to leave the tyrant immediately, but she only started screaming in response, and said that she did not ask for advice on what to do, but only wanted to talk. It should also be added that the couple, trying to save their marriage, turned for help to a family psychologist who was supposed to help them in this. However, the husband rejected all the options chosen by the wife and insisted on his specialist, who at the sessions convinced Sultanat that only she was to blame for everything. In one of the last conversations with her brother, she told about her suspicions that the psychologist was hired by her husband specifically to once again humiliate and demoralize her. In the summer of 2023, Sultanat made an attempt to leave her husband and decided to move to the house of her parents for a while, but a week later Kwandek himself came to pick her up, urging her to give him another chance to save their marriage. Plus, he offered to move to his own house, and Sultanat decided that a change of scenery could be beneficial to their relationship. She also believed that the birth of a child together would change her husband's attitude towards her, but she could not get pregnant. The last family dinner in October, Sultanat made a last attempt to leave her tyrant husband and even moved to a rented apartment, which her brother helped her to find in a hurry. However, only 10 days later, she not only returned to her husband, but also went through the Muslim rite of marriage with him again in the mosque, Nikah, about which she personally informed her family. On November 5th, she invited her parents, brother, and a few close friends to the restaurant owned by Bishambeyev's cousin, Bekitjan Byzanov. The family was celebrating the reunion of the couple, and the husband behaved very gallantly and courteously towards the chosen one, showed care, did not take his eyes off her in love, promised to protect her and carry her in his arms. That evening everyone believed in the sincerity of his feelings and words, but the tragedy was only days away, terrible news. On November 9th of the same year, Sultanat's brother came home from work and was minding his own business, when suddenly there was a phone call, and his relative asked in a frightened voice whether what was being written on social networks was true. The man didn't understand what it was about, and asked her to clarify what had happened. Then the woman sent him a link to a news item that said the former Minister of Economy had killed his young wife. Aitbek was discouraged by this news, but did not believe in the truthfulness of what was written. The day before he had talked to his sister, and she once again said that she was going to leave her husband. Sultanat asked her brother if she could come to him for a sleepover, and he replied that she could do so at any time, indicating where the spare keys to the front door were. But neither that evening nor the next day did Sultanat come home, and her phone had been silent ever since. The man rushed to his sister's house, but there was no one there. Her husband was also not answering his phone, and the situation was quickly escalating. The decision was made instantly to go to the family restaurant from where Sultanat had last contacted and look for answers there. While his brother was on the road, he received a call from his frightened parents who had also read the news and tried to find out what had really happened. But his son could not answer them and only promised to look into it. There were many policemen in the restaurant who, having learned that Sultanat's relative had arrived, first of all began to express their condolences to him, noting that his sister could not be helped and died before the medics arrived. Aitbek could not believe his ears. It seemed to him that all this was some monstrous mistake, but the terrible news was true. The testimony of the detainees. By the time the dead woman's brother arrived, Kwandek had already been arrested and sent to the station as the main suspect. He categorically denied his guilt, wrote off what had happened as a horrible accident, and claimed that he was trying to help his wife. His brother and restaurant owner, Bekitjan Byzanov, was also taken into custody on suspicion of complicity. At the first stages, the suspect's lawyer insisted on the complete innocence of his client, noting that there was no evidence of his guilt. But as it soon turned out, the evidence was promptly tried to destroy the ex-minister and his brother by deleting the recordings from the video cameras inside and outside the restaurant. But specialists managed to restore the video materials, and what was filmed there literally shocked everyone without exception. The investigation of this difficult case lasted almost 4 months, and all this time the main suspect insisted on his innocence, and he also behaved as if he was initially confident in impunity. At the same time, he was incriminated with the article, "Murder with Particular Cruelty." It should be noted that forensic experts who examined the body of the deceased noted that for the first time they encountered such extensive and severe injuries. Some of them the woman received about 6-8 hours before her death. Therefore, she was beaten long and severely, leaving literally no living space on her face and body. But the suspect's lawyers tried in every possible way to minimize his guilt. He himself claimed that almost all the injuries of his wife caused herself because she was drunk, constantly falling, and banged her head on the tiles, on the toilet, and on the furniture, trying to reconstruct a picture of what happened. So, it was found out that on that fateful evening, November 8, 2023, the spouses, together with friends, went to the concert of singer Dima Bilan. There they strongly quarreled, but about the cause and nature of the quarrel friends could not say anything intelligible. The music was playing loudly in the hall, and they did not immediately realize that the couple was scandalizing, believing that they were just discussing something. But then the spouses suddenly left the hall and left without saying anything to anyone. The couple went to the restaurant, Bao, where they continued to quarrel, having closed themselves in one of the VIP cabins. The camera footage shows that the man took a few bottles of alcohol from the bar and retired to a booth with his wife. There, in the process of drinking wine and clarifying relations, the woman said that this could not go on and she intended to leave her husband. Vishambayev was enraged by this. He began to shout and threaten and slapped Sultanat. After that, she called her brother and said that she would come to his house for the night because she had finally decided to leave her husband. Around midnight, The young woman went outside, intending to go to her brother's house, but her husband caught up with her there and continued the scandal. The surveillance footage shows that they argued for about 15 minutes, but then the man managed to convince the spouse to go back into the building. For a few minutes, the couple still continued to quarrel in the vestibule, and then they again secluded themselves in a stall. Unfortunately, there were no cameras there, so we can only guess what was going on inside. The recordings from the camera located in the hallway show how Sultanat tried her best to get away from her husband, behaving calmly and keeping her distance, while he constantly tried to get closer to her, grabbed her hands, head, shook her, and pressed her against the wall. In court, the defendant's lawyer called these actions stroking. Sultanat, unable to escape, tried to hide from the tyrant and locked herself in the toilet. However, this did not stop the husband, and he began to literally kick the door, trying to get inside, as evidenced by the corresponding injuries. He forced the wife to open the door and immediately struck her several times in the face. He then reproached her and accused her of living at his expense, and that Quandek had bought her everything she had. It is difficult to judge what happened next. The defendant claimed that his wife got angry and in a fit of rage took off all her clothes and jewelry, which she then flushed down the toilet, to show that she did not need anything from him. According to another version, the man himself forced her to undress in order to humiliate her once again. After the gold jewelry went down the drain, Bishembayev became furious and hit his wife several times in the face with his fist, and then pushed her so hard that she fell and hit the toilet. But at trial he claimed that the wife was drunk and, while undressing, fell several times herself, hitting her head on the tiles and plumbing. Then, according to the defendant, he and his wife intended to go home and left the restaurant, but he himself did not dare to drive, as he had drunk a lot of alcohol and did not want to call a cab to avoid shame, because he was ashamed of his drunken wife, who was in an unsightly state, in a coat over underwear. So they went back to the bow, still in the same stall. Soon the couple came out again and headed for the exit, but Sultanat stopped at the mirror, looking at her broken face. Then her husband began to forcefully push her towards the exit. Then the process turned into a banal beating of the unfortunate. The man mercilessly beat her with his hands and feet, dragged her by the hair, and about 7 o'clock in the morning, still by the hair, dragged her back to the VIP cabin. There the pervert actually finished his young wife, although at the trial he claimed that he did not touch her. Allegedly she herself fell and hit the floor and furniture. Then Sultanat allegedly lay down on the sofa and fell asleep, and he noticed a bruise on her face and became concerned. But he did not call an ambulance, but a fortune teller to make a reading and tell him if everything was all right with his wife. The fortune teller assured him that the woman was drunk and needed to sleep, so Quandek calmed down and decided not to touch her. He claimed to have heard snoring, which he later found out was a death rattle. Toward noon, realizing that his wife was no longer breathing, the man called his brother, the kitchen Byzanov, and asked him to come urgently. Together they disbanded the staff and closed the establishment to visitors, after which they began to delete the footage from all the CCTV cameras. Later at the trial, the kitchen claimed that he believed his brother that the woman was drunk and asleep and agreed to delete the recordings, as they allegedly depicted Sultanat's indecent behavior, dishonoring her honor and the honor of her family. Byzanov called an ambulance only towards evening, when the woman's body was already cold and rigor mortis had begun. According to him, he tried to perform resuscitative actions, but they were useless. Sultanat had long since died. Law enforcers who arrived on the scene arrested both brothers. The opinion of Bishembayev's former wife while the investigation was going on, the former wife of the defendant and mother of his 3 children, Nazim Kakarman Babagulova, was also under scrutiny. Several years ago, when the ex-minister was arrested in a corruption case, she spoke in his defense, but almost immediately after he was released, she filed for divorce. The reason given was the standard irreconcilable differences, and she herself claimed to have outgrown that marriage. However, after the high-profile accusation of her ex-husband in the brutal murder of his new girlfriend, Nazim gave a frank interview in which she admitted that the man is really capable of such a crime. The woman said that they had been married for 14 years, but in 2011, after the birth of their second child, he became aggressive, selfish, and narcissistic, believing that the whole world should revolve around him, and his opinion is paramount. In addition, the man was constantly cheating on his wife, without hiding it. But it was only after Bishembayev's arrest in 2017, when access to personal data in the former minister's phone was obtained, that his wife realized the extent of the cheating. According to her, her husband had several mistresses, and they were constantly changing. And after Quandick was released by the Pardon Commission, he became even more violent and aggressive. A month later, a quarrel broke out between the couple over some trifle, but the man instantly flew into a rage and threw a toilet lid at Nazim, which he ripped out with his bare hands. The woman managed to dodge, but it was at that moment that she realized that the marriage was over. In her opinion, Quandick held back his demons for so long because he realized that she would not tolerate it, but he allowed himself to humiliate and insult his mistresses, who could not resist him. In the case of Sultanat, Kaharman believes that the man initially chose his victim, tested the limits of her patience and submission, and when he realized that she would not go anywhere and would not complain, he showed her his true face of a sophisticated sadist. Why a jury trial? The trial began in March 2024, and it was immediately clear that the case would not be easy. The relatives of the murdered woman insisted that the trial be as open as possible, with journalists present, and the whole world could watch what was happening in the hall. They feared that the defendant would use his money and extensive connections to put pressure on witnesses and judges, and try to avoid harsh punishment. In turn, Bishimbayev insisted on a jury trial, and his request was granted. 12 jurors were selected, 10 main jurors and 2 additional jurors, as well as the judge himself. All this was done with the sole purpose of avoiding the maximum penalty of life imprisonment. Previously, the ex-minister had already been convicted of a serious offense, but was released on parole, and a new particularly serious crime would have guaranteed him a life sentence. However, in the case of a jury trial, the criminal will only receive the capital punishment if all the jurors, plus the judge himself, vote in favor. The likelihood of that outcome is extremely slim, so the defendant clung to that possibility. Trial sessions, the defendant has repeatedly stated that he does not recognize himself guilty of premeditated murder with particular cruelty, insisting that everything happened accidentally, due to a tragic confluence of many factors. According to the man, the spouse herself provoked him, insulted, shouted, and threw herself into the fight. But numerous recordings from video surveillance cameras, which experts fortunately managed to recover, spoke to the contrary. Initially, they tried to incriminate Bishimbayev under the article domestic violence, which in Kazakhstan, thanks to the lenient legislation, does not entail serious punishment. But this aspect caused a wave of criticism and condemnation, especially from the relatives of the dead woman. Her mother tearfully stated in court that she was not even allowed to say goodbye to her daughter because the injuries were so horrible, but now her son-in-law can get off with a light punishment, which deprives her of faith and justice. Amid public outrage, a law was approved in April 2024 to toughen penalties for domestic violence in Kazakhstan. Quandick also tried to put serious pressure on his brother, accused of complicity, forcing him to give false testimony in order to get away with it. However, Byzanov asked the court to shield him from his relative, and his petition was granted. Each time during the sessions, Bishimbayev tried in every possible way to denigrate his late wife, calling her an inadequate, unbalanced alcoholic who constantly cheated on him and provoked him to rudeness. He tried to convince the court that he had acted in a state of passion that night and had only hit his wife a couple of times, but those injuries were not fatal. All the other injuries were allegedly self-inflicted by her, constantly falling down under the influence of alcohol, and the livid marks on the woman's neck he wrote off to resuscitation measures in attempts to bring her to her senses, claiming that this was how he helped her. According to the second defendant in the case, the relative did not allow him to call medics to the dying woman, and was only concerned about deleting the footage from all the cameras as quickly as possible. Quandick then ordered him to take his wife's cell phone to their home, to simulate her movement around the city, and to make it appear that she had returned to the apartment, because he knew that his brother was tracking her geolocation. During the 9th hearing, the defendant and his lawyer requested the recusal of the judge, Ayjan Kolbeva, accusing her of lack of impartiality. However, the recusal was denied, and the judge continued to conduct the trial until the verdict. What was the verdict? Just recently, on May 13, 2024, Quandick Bishimbayev was found guilty of inflicting grievous bodily harm, torture, and murder of his common-law wife. He was sentenced to 20 years under the article murder, as well as 7 years for battery and torture. By partially adding up the terms, the man received 24 years in prison. A relative of the ex-minister, Bakichian Byzanov, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for harboring. The court took into account the fact that earlier Byzanov had no problems with the law, sincerely repented, and cooperated with the investigation in every possible way. Family members of the deceased Sultanate were dissatisfied with the court's decision. Her father, Amanjeldi Nukhanov, previously said that he hoped for a life sentence for his former son-in-law, and any other decision of the court would be unfair. At the same time, the brother of the murdered, Aitbek, noted that 24 years in prison for 44-year-old Bishimbayev is practically a life sentence. Case 5. In March 1994, the bodies of these 4 young women were discovered in a chillingly similar way. Each one had been brutally assaulted and strangled to death in their own homes, the very place they should have felt safe. When investigators finally tracked down their suspect, they uncovered a cold-blooded murderer who would go down in history as the first known African-American serial killer. And those 4 women, they were just the beginning. A serial killer is shocking enough, but Bad Henry, as the show is called, profiles the man who's known as America's first African-American serial killer. He was accused in 90 killings, convicted of 9 right here in Charlotte. And wait until you hear the connection between all of his victims. Between 1990 and 1994, at least 10 black women were found dead, all killed in the same horrifying way. But the police failed to connect the dots, whether it was carelessness or something worse. They let the bodies pile up while the killer kept hunting. In fact, he wasn't hiding. He was right there, even known to some of his victims. And it took 4 long years before he was finally caught. And it makes you wonder, if the police had done their job sooner, how many could have been saved. That man was Henry Louis Wallace, casually detailing how he ended the lives of his victims like it was nothing. But before we uncover why he did it, and how he managed to stay undetected for so long, let's first get to know the women he was talking about, starting with Caroline Love. Caroline Love was 20 years old in the summer of 1992, working as a cashier at Bojangles. She had been at the job for more than 2 years, earning a reputation as a hard-working and reliable employee. Born and raised in Charlotte, she had always been driven. She ran track in junior high, graduated from Geringer High School, and later enrolled at Central Piedmont Community College to study nursing. By June of that year, Caroline Love was living with her best friend, Sadie McKnight, who also happened to be Henry's longtime girlfriend. They shared an apartment at Darby Terrace on Central Avenue, just a few blocks from the Bojangles restaurant where they both worked. On the night of June 15th, Caroline finished her shift and asked her manager to exchange a $10 bill for a roll of quarters so she could do laundry. He handed her the quarters, and she left the restaurant just after midnight. No one knew it then, but that was the last time anyone would ever see her alive. That night, Henry was already inside the apartment waiting. He had a spare key and let himself in, knowing Sadie wasn't home yet. When Caroline walked through the door, he greeted her with a smile, acting like he belonged there. Then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed her on the cheek. Caroline was in complete shock, just like anyone would be in her shoes. It wasn't just that Henry kissed her, it was because he was her best friend's boyfriend. Trying to keep things from getting worse, she told him that as long as he never did it again, she'd let it go and wouldn't tell Sadie. But Henry wasn't about to take no for an answer. In an instant, his friendly demeanor vanished. Before Caroline could even process what was happening, he lunged at her, his hands tightening around her throat. She gasped, struggling to break free, but he was too strong. He forced her into her bedroom, pinned her down, and assaulted her. She fought back with everything she had, but her resistance only fueled his rage. Determined to silence her forever, he grabbed a curling iron, wrapped the cord around her neck, and pulled until she stopped breathing. At this point, Caroline was gone. Now he had to cover his tracks. He grabbed Caroline's bedsheets and quickly wrapped her lifeless body, then stuffed her inside a large orange trash bag. With no hesitation, he dragged her out of the apartment and into his car. But before leaving, he went back inside, scanning the room for anything he could take to make it seem like she had simply disappeared. That's when he spotted the roll of quarters she had gotten earlier that night. He grabbed it, locked the door behind him, and walked away as if nothing had happened. The night was dark and quiet as Henry drove through the streets, looking for a place where no one would find her. Eventually, he reached a secluded area. Without a second thought, he pulled over, dragged Caroline's body from the car, and dumped her into a ditch. Then, just like that, he got back in and drove away. Hours later, Sadie came home, completely unaware of the horror that had just unfolded in her apartment. Everything seemed normal at first, until she got a call from Caroline's sister, Kathy. There was worry in her voice. She hadn't heard from Caroline all day, and when she called Bojangles, she learned that Caroline had never shown up for work. Caroline was responsible, always on time, so this was totally unlike her. At first, Sadie tried to stay calm, but as the minutes passed with no sign of Caroline, concern quickly turned into panic. Desperate for answers, she, Kathy, and even Henry went to the police station to file a missing person report, hoping someone could help them find her. When the police arrived at the apartment to investigate, it was immediately clear that something was off. Caroline's bedsheets were missing. The furniture looked like it had been moved, almost as if there had been a struggle. The roll of quarters she had gotten the night before had also vanished, yet there was no sign she had gone to do laundry. Her hamper was still full. But despite all the red flags, the case was treated as a simple missing person report. There was no real investigation, no deeper look into what had actually happened that night. Time passed, and eventually people began to move on. At this point, Henry thought he was untouchable. He had already gotten away with Caroline's murder, and his violent urges were only growing stronger. But he wasn't some outcast, hiding away in the shadows. In fact, Henry had a decent social life. He was a well-liked manager at Taco Bell, where he built relationships with his employees. One of them was Shauna Hawk, a bright young woman juggling college and work, completely unaware that her boss was hiding a deadly secret. 7 months after Caroline vanished, on the afternoon of February 17, 1993, Henry showed up at Shauna's home. When she heard the doorbell, she had no reason to be suspicious. After all, it was just Henry. She let him in, and for about an hour, they talked like normal coworkers. At one point, she even joked with him about the problems he was having with his girlfriend, Sadie. Everything seemed fine, but as their conversation wrapped up and Shauna walked Henry to the door, his entire demeanor changed in an instant. Without warning, Henry told Shauna he wanted to sleep with her. But it wasn't a suggestion. It was a demand. According to Henry, Shauna gave in, and they went to her bedroom. But after it was over, things took an even darker turn. He ordered her to get dressed and go into the bathroom. She complied, probably too scared to argue. But once she stepped inside, Henry followed, wrapping his hands around her throat. Just like Caroline, she fought back with everything she had, but Henry was just too strong. As soon as she lost consciousness, he filled the bathtub with water and placed her inside. Then, as if he had just finished running an errand, he took $50 from her purse and left, completely unfazed by what he had just done. By the time Shauna was found, it was too late. It's safe to say that the police investigation was a disaster. Despite questioning Shauna's friends and family, they came up with nothing. No real leads, no real suspects, just another young woman gone without justice. And Henry? He had no reason to be worried. A few days after the murder, Shauna's funeral was held, and in a sickening twist, Henry himself showed up to pay his respects. He stood among the mourners, pretending to grieve like everyone else. But no one was more devastated than Shauna's mother. She was the one who found her daughter lifeless in the bathtub, a moment that would haunt her forever. Her only child, gone in the most brutal way imaginable. She then wrote a public letter, pleading with the unknown killer to come forward, hoping that somehow, her words might reach the monster who took her daughter away. Dear killer, I am the mother of Shauna Denise Hawk. I'm writing to you because you murdered my only daughter in our home on February 19, 1993, between the hours of 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. I find it so hard to believe that an entire year has gone by since that horrible Friday evening when Shauna's dead body was discovered in the bathtub where you put her. But Henry didn't care. In fact, this wouldn't be the last time he killed a coworker. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Months after taking Shauna's life, he struck again, and this time, his target was another one of his Taco Bell employees, a 24-year-old woman named Audrey Spain. Audrey had just returned home from a vacation, probably feeling relaxed and happy, completely unaware that a monster was about to enter her life. Just like before, Henry used his charm to talk his way inside. He made it seem casual, just a friendly visit, nothing out of the ordinary. They sat down and had a conversation, just like he had done with Shauna. And just like before, Audrey had no reason to be afraid. But the moment she let her guard down, Henry flipped. Without hesitation, he grabbed her and forced her to the ground. This time, it wasn't just about control, it was about money. Henry was desperate for cash, and he demanded that Audrey give him the combination to the safe at Taco Bell. He needed money for crack, and his addiction had driven him to a new level of violence. But there was one problem. Audrey didn't know the combination. She told him over and over that she didn't have the answer he was looking for, but Henry didn't believe her. His frustration turned into pure rage, and his aggression escalated. The more she insisted she didn't know, the angrier he became, and then just like before, his fury turned deadly. In his growing rage, Henry did what had now become second nature. He wrapped his hands around Audrey's throat and squeezed it until she passed out. Afterwards, Henry dragged Audrey to her bedroom and violated her, just like what he did to Caroline and Shauna. Once he was finished, he strangled her to death, then calmly washed her body off in the shower, as if trying to erase the horror he had just inflicted. He placed her lifeless body on her bed, stole her credit card, and walked out as if nothing had happened. When Audrey's lifeless body was found 3 days later, an investigation was launched. But for reasons unknown, the police and detectives once again failed to connect the dots. The similarities were obvious. Both Shauna and Audrey were young women in their early 20s. Both were murdered in their homes, both worked at the same Taco Bell, and both were strangled. Yet somehow this didn't raise any red flags, and because of this failure, Henry saw no reason to stop. His next target was 21-year-old college student Valencia Jumper. Valencia, a bright and ambitious young woman from Columbia, South Carolina, had a connection to Henry. She was friends with his sister. They had spent time together before, so when Henry showed up at her door, she had no reason to be suspicious. On August 10, 1993, Henry knocked on Valencia's door, spinning a familiar story. He told her that he had just had a terrible fight with his girlfriend, Sadie, and needed someone to talk to. Being kind and understanding, Valencia let him in without hesitation. Henry and Valencia had a long conversation. She was offering him some advice, talking to him about whatever was going on. But after they spoke for a while, Henry convinced Valencia to call Sadie and let her know where he was. When she got up to make the call, though, things took a dark turn. Henry's dangerous side, the one nobody saw coming, took over, and he switched to his true, violent nature. In a flash, he grabbed Valencia and put her in a chokehold. She struggled, but it didn't take long before she lost consciousness. When she was completely out, Henry dragged her to the bedroom, and that's where things went from bad to worse. He did things to her that no one should ever have to experience, and when he was done, he made sure she wouldn't wake up. He strangled her with a towel, but this time Henry didn't follow the same pattern as before. Instead of leaving her body in the bathtub like his previous victims, he did something far more twisted. He filled the bathtub with rum, not water. It was a strange and disturbing choice, but Henry wasn't done yet. He then took her body and placed it inside the tub. Once that was done, he casually walked to the kitchen, turned on the stove, and put a can of pork and beans on high heat. Before leaving the house, Henry made sure he covered every trace. He ripped the smoke detector off the ceiling, removed its batteries, and struck a match, setting it on fire. He made sure to leave behind no evidence of what he had done. The fire quickly grew, burning everything in its way. When Valencia's body was finally discovered, the flames had already done their work. The official report said she died from thermal burns. It seemed like just another tragic incident, but if anyone had taken a deeper look, they might have uncovered the truth, because let's be real. A thorough investigation and a proper autopsy would have shown what Henry had done, but once again, the authorities failed. Another woman had been killed, another crime scene was botched, and Henry walked away, free and unnoticed, ready to carry on his twisted ways. A few days after killing Valencia, Henry had the audacity to attend her funeral, standing among mourners as if he hadn't been the one responsible for her death. He even went with his sister, blending in with the grieving crowd. But Henry wasn't done. Just 5 weeks later, he struck again, this time targeting a mother. On September 15, 1993, Henry set his sights on Michelle Stinson, another coworker from Taco Bell. That night, he went to her home, and when he arrived, Michelle welcomed him inside. The two of them sat and talked for a while, having what seemed like a normal conversation. By then, Michelle's kids were already fast asleep in their bedrooms, completely unaware of the nightmare that was about to unfold. As their conversation came to an end, Henry suddenly hugged Michelle and told her he wanted to be intimate with her. But Michelle wasn't interested. She told him she wasn't feeling well. That should have been the end of it, but as mentioned earlier, Henry wasn't to take no for an answer. Instead, he got angry and demanded to see all the medications she was supposedly taking. He searched for prescriptions but found nothing. And that was all it took for his frustration to explode. Right there, in the middle of the kitchen floor, Henry overpowered Michelle and took advantage of her. But that wasn't enough for him. When he was done, he tried to strangle her with a towel, just like he had done to Valencia. But Michelle fought with everything she had. She gasped for air, moaned in pain, and refused to let go of life so easily. Seeing that she was still struggling, Henry grabbed a large kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times in the back. In the middle of this horrific attack, Michelle's 3-year-old son suddenly walked into the room. The innocent child had no idea what he was witnessing, but Henry quickly turned to him and ordered him to go back to bed. The boy obeyed, disappearing into his room while his mother lay bleeding on the floor. Once Henry was sure Michelle was dead, he grabbed the towel and the bloody knife, left the apartment, and threw both items over a nearby fence before disappearing into the night. The next morning, Michelle's children were the ones who found her lifeless body lying in the kitchen. Not long after, a friend stopped by to check on her. When they asked the little boy where his mother was, he simply said, "She's sleeping." He was too young to understand that she would never wake up again. And just like before, the police investigation into Michelle's murder was a disaster. Authorities failed to connect Henry to the crime. In fact, he wasn't even considered a suspect. By this point, 5 women had been murdered or gone missing, all within a 5-mile radius. Fear spread through the community. People were terrified, wondering if they would be next. In response, authorities increased police presence in East Charlotte. Now, sensing the pressure, Henry kept a lower profile for a while. But that didn't mean he stopped his crimes. He was still up to no good, committing smaller offenses while staying out of the spotlight. Early the following year, he fathered a child with a woman who wasn't his girlfriend. Then, on February 4th, 1994, he was arrested for shoplifting. The police detained him, gave him a court date, and let him go. But when the date came, Henry didn't show up. A warrant was issued for his arrest, but law enforcement barely made an effort to track him down. Once again, Henry slipped through the cracks. By now, he felt so untouchable, unlike never before. In his mind, he could do whatever he wanted and never face any consequences. And so, it wasn't long before he gave in to his darkest urges again. On February 20th, 1994, Henry knocked on the door of Vanessa Mack, a 25-year-old woman who happened to be the sister of one of his Taco Bell co-workers. He used the same manipulative tactics he had before, chatting casually, gaining her trust, and convincing her to let him inside. The moment she did, he turned violent. He dragged her to the bedroom, assaulted her, and then strangled her to death. Before leaving, he stole her bank card, thinking only about his next hit of crack cocaine. The next morning, Vanessa's mother found her daughter's lifeless body. As for the police investigation, well, it went exactly how you'd expect. Investigators failed once again. Vanessa was now the 3rd murder victim connected to the same Taco Bell location, yet authorities still didn't see the pattern. By now, Henry was getting careless, too bold for his own good. His addiction to crack was spiraling out of control, and he was desperate for money. The following string of murders would unfold in just a short span of time. In fact, within a period of only 3 days, starting on March 8, 1994, Henry's killing spree would reach new levels of brutality. On March 8, 1994, Henry showed up at the apartment of his friend, Bernice Woods. His real plan was to attack and rob Bernice's girlfriend, Brandy Henderson, but things didn't go as expected. When Henry knocked on the door, it was Bernice who answered instead of Brandy. Caught off guard, Henry quickly made up a story. He told Bernice that he was leaving town for a while and just wanted to say goodbye. After a short conversation, he left the apartment complex, but Henry wasn't done for the night. As he walked away, he remembered that another person he knew lived in the same complex, Betty Jean Bauckham, who worked as an assistant manager at Bojangles alongside his girlfriend, Sadie. Since Betty was in a position of authority, Henry assumed she knew the combination to the restaurant's safe. Seeing an opportunity, he went straight to her apartment and knocked on the door. When Betty answered, Henry told her he needed to use her phone. Without hesitation, Betty welcomed him inside. While she turned her back to him, Henry pretended to make a call, but the moment she was distracted, he dropped the phone, rushed up behind her, and put her in a chokehold. Betty struggled, but Henry's grip was too strong. He demanded that she give him the safe combination, the restaurant keys, and the alarm code, everything he needed to rob the Bojangles. Betty held out for about 30 minutes, refusing to cooperate, but eventually she gave in. The moment she told him the safe code, Henry loosened his grip and let her go. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of panicking or begging, Betty asked Henry what was wrong with him. In response, Henry admitted that he was sick. He told her he had hurt many people. But instead of reacting with fear, Betty did something incredibly brave. She forgave him. She even told him he needed to get help. But Henry didn't care. Her words meant nothing to him. The moment she finished speaking, Henry snapped. Just like so many before her, Betty suffered the same brutal fate. He dragged her to the bedroom, assaulted her, and then strangled her to death. Before leaving, he robbed her apartment, taking a TV, a VCR, a gold chain, and even her car. He drove straight to a pawn shop, sold everything, and used the money to buy crack. But his killing spree wasn't over yet. Just 12 hours later, Henry returned to the same apartment complex. This time, he was determined to finish what he had originally planned. He knew Bernice would be at work, which meant Brandy was home alone with her infant son. Once again, he knocked on the door, pretending he had something to drop off for Bernice. Trusting him, Brandy let him inside. As soon as she turned her back, Henry grabbed her in a chokehold and demanded money. But there was barely anything in the apartment, just a Pringles can filled with loose change. Clearly that wasn't enough for him, so he dragged Brandy to the bedroom, assaulted her, and then strangled her to death. Then something unexpected happened. The baby started crying uncontrollably. Henry tried giving the child a pacifier, but when that didn't work, he did something truly monstrous. He grabbed a towel and began strangling the baby. Eventually, the crying stopped. Before leaving, Henry wiped down the entire apartment, making sure to erase any fingerprints. He then stole Brandy's TV and stereo system and disappeared into the night, leaving behind another horrifying crime scene. Next, Henry pawned off both stolen items and used the money to buy more crack. Fortunately, Brandy's baby survived the attack, but by this time, the police were finally closing in on Henry. After the discovery of 2 murdered women in the same apartment complex, local authorities held a meeting. They compared the recent murders and quickly realized a chilling pattern. Each victim was somehow connected to one man, Henry Louis Wallace. In hindsight, these connections should have been made much sooner, but due to a lack of resources and urgency, law enforcement had failed to act. While police were piecing things together and preparing to arrest him, Henry was already hunting for his next victim. This time, he targeted Deborah Slaughter, a former co-worker of his girlfriend at Bojangles. Henry knew that Deborah used crack, and he planned to exploit this. When he arrived at her home, he tried to convince her to split the cost of drugs with him, but she refused. Frustrated, Henry asked for a drink. As soon as Deborah turned her back, he grabbed a towel and wrapped it around her neck. As she struggled, she did something shocking. She accused him of murdering Brandy Henderson and Betty Beckham, and instead of denying it, Henry responded by assaulting her. Then he started rummaging through her purse, looking for valuables. Knowing that Deborah kept a knife in her bag, Henry forced her to dump out the contents in front of him. As soon as the knife fell to the ground, he kicked it away and demanded all the money in her wallet. She handed over $40, but Deborah wasn't going down without a fight. In a moment of defiance, she smacked Henry across the face and started screaming for help. But Henry wasn't about to let her escape. He tightened the towel around her neck once again, forcing her to the ground before repeatedly stabbing her 38 times in the stomach and chest. Within moments, Deborah succumbed to her injuries. After robbing her, Henry used the stolen money to buy more crack, but later that night, he made a chilling move. He returned to her apartment to clean up the scene, just as he had done before. However, his reign of terror was finally coming to an end. The very next day, police arrested Henry Louis Wallace. Wallace denied everything at first. He tried to distance himself from the crimes, but the weight of the investigation was undeniable. Police had fingerprints linking him to a stolen vehicle, ATM footage of him using Vanessa's debit card, and eyewitness accounts placing him at the crime scenes. Under pressure, Wallace cracked. When asked to write down the names of his victims, detectives expected 4 names, for murders they had already connected to him. But as Wallace kept writing, their stomachs churned. The list was longer than they had feared. He was responsible for at least 11 murders, a horrifying revelation that transformed their investigation into one of the most chilling serial killer cases in North Carolina's history. To understand Henry Louis Wallace, we have to go back to where it all started. Born in Barnwell, South Carolina in 1965, Henry grew up in a small town with his mother and sister. His father left before he was born, and his mother was strict, controlling, and often cruel. She made sure Henry followed her every rule, but despite her efforts, Wallace wasn't a good student. He struggled in school, rarely stood out, and never showed signs of brilliance or violence. After high school, he bounced from job to job, served in the Navy, and eventually moved to Charlotte, North Carolina in the early 1990s, where his killing spree would begin. Now, Henry's dark obsession with violence against women didn't start when he became a killer. It started much earlier, when he was just a boy. One day, young Henry witnessed a horrifying attack in the woods. A group of men assaulted a woman, and instead of feeling shock or fear, Henry later confessed that the scene excited him. That disturbing moment planted a seed in his mind, a twisted fascination that would later fuel his killing spree. In his confession, Wallace revealed that Caroline Love wasn't his first victim. In fact, his violent actions had started 2 years before her tragic death. His known victim was someone he had known for years, Tashonda Bathia, a high school student who had trusted him. Wallace had been quietly fixating on her, but no one around them had noticed the warning signs. One evening, he offered her a ride. She had no reason to feel unsafe. After all, she'd known him for a long time. But once inside the car, the situation changed. Wallace attacked her, took her life, and left her body in a pond, hoping no one would ever find out. For weeks, her loved ones searched for her, holding on to hope that she would return home. But that hope was shattered when her body was discovered in the water. Wallace was questioned by the police, but there wasn't enough evidence to connect him to the crime. And so he walked free. After realizing how easy it was to get away with his crimes, Wallace continued his violent spree. But before he even took the life of Caroline Love, he had already claimed another victim. In May of 1992, he crossed paths with Sharon Nance, a 33-year-old woman who had lived a difficult life. She worked hard to survive, but that night, all she wanted was what she was owed. Wallace refused to pay, and when she stood up for herself, he reacted with brutal violence. He beat her mercilessly, before leaving her lifeless body near the railroad tracks. Days later, she was found, but by then, Wallace was already moving on. For the next 2 years, he continued choosing victims, women he knew personally, women who trusted him. And all the while, no one realized a serial killer was living among them. 2 years after his arrest, Henry Louis Wallace finally faced trial in September of 1996. His defense team attempted to argue that Wallace suffered from mental illness and drug addiction, claiming that his use of crack cocaine impaired his judgment. While there was no denying that he had taken the lives of multiple women, his lawyers insisted that his crimes did not amount to first-degree murder. They claimed they were not premeditated acts, but rather impulsive violence driven by addiction. However, Wallace's own words betrayed him. His recorded confession revealed that, in at least some of these cases, he had planned the murders ahead of time. He admitted to entering the homes of his victims with the intent to rob and kill them, contradicting the defense's argument. The trial lasted for 3 months, and on January 7, 1997, the jury reached a verdict. Henry Louis Wallace was convicted of the first-degree murder of 9 women. The sentence was clear, 9 death sentences, 1 for each life he had taken. On June 5, 1998, Henry Louis Wallace shocked the public once again, not with another crime, but with a wedding. Inside North Carolina's death row, just steps away from the state's execution chamber, Wallace married Rebecca Torrijos, a former prison nurse. The Mecklenburg County Public Defender, Isabel Day, acted as an official witness, and even took photos of the ceremony. Also present was the manager of the death row unit, watching as a convicted serial killer exchanged vows. But Wallace wasn't focused only on his new marriage. He was also determined to escape his fate. Since being sentenced to death in 1997, he has made several appeals, arguing that his confessions were coerced and that his constitutional rights were violated. Despite his efforts, the North Carolina Supreme Court upheld his sentence in the year 2000. Then, in 2001, the United States Supreme Court denied his appeal, leaving him with little hope of overturning his punishment. By 2005, after another rejected appeal, it became clear that Wallace was running out of options. Today, Henry Louis Wallace remains on death row, awaiting execution. However, for the families of his victims, justice remains an elusive concept. While the legal system handed down its harshest sentence, nothing can ever undo the pain and loss that Wallace inflicted. The scars left behind by his crimes will never fully heal, no matter the punishment he receives. Case 6. January 2024, Northern Chile. A vast, lifeless desert stretching for hundreds of miles became the site of a chilling discovery. Beneath the sand, human remains were uncovered. The location was near the city of Calama, an isolated, harsh region where the extreme climate could preserve a body for an extended period. A group of researchers studying the area's geological features accidentally stumbled upon partially exposed bones. The sight was unsettling, a shallow burial, no clothing, and no personal belongings that could immediately reveal the person's identity. They promptly reported the find to law enforcement. A rapid response team, including forensic specialists and crime scene investigators, arrived at the site. A thorough examination of the area showed clear signs that the remains had been deliberately concealed. The terrain in this region is dense and difficult to dig, yet someone had taken the effort to carve out a shallow grave. Before long, authorities determined that the remains belonged to a woman. Preliminary forensic analysis pointed to a violent end. Some damage to the bones suggested that the event leading to her passing had not been instantaneous. News of the unsettling discovery quickly made its way to the media. That same evening, local news stations aired an urgent report. Journalists detailed the finding of the remains, speculating about a potential link to a long-standing missing persons case. The story spread rapidly across social media, sparking intense discussion. Many recalled a high-profile disappearance that had shaken the country back in 2022. Javiera Jimenez was born and raised in Chile. She grew up in a warm and supportive family environment. As the eldest daughter, she developed a strong sense of responsibility from an early age. Her parents worked hard to provide a comfortable life for their children, instilling values of determination and independence. Javiera quickly learned that if she wanted to succeed, she would have to rely on her own perseverance. From childhood, she was known for her energetic and goal-driven nature. In school, she showed a strong interest in academics, particularly in math and science, but what fascinated her most was working with people. She had a natural ability to connect with others, always ready to help and build relationships. As a teenager, she set her sights on a career in dentistry. After graduating high school, Javiera enrolled in college to study dental care. Her dream was to become a skilled professional and eventually open her own practice. She was determined to make progress and worked tirelessly to balance her studies with a part-time job. She found employment at a bar as a hostess, where she greeted customers and helped maintain a welcoming atmosphere. This job not only provided a source of income, but also allowed her to develop her communication skills. Javiera was also actively growing her presence on social media. She started with small posts about her daily life, but soon her content began attracting a wider audience. She promoted clothing, cosmetics, and other products, collaborating with local brands. Thanks to her charisma and ability to engage people, her blog quickly gained popularity. Javiera didn't limit herself to just work and studies. She dedicated a lot of time to personal development and was determined to achieve financial independence. At 18, she moved out of her family home, covering all her living expenses on her own. Her loved ones were proud of how early she showed independence and the ability to handle any challenge. Despite her busy schedule, Javiera always made time for her family. She was close to her mother and brothers, visiting them regularly and sharing her future plans. A life of stagnation was never an option for her. She was always striving to move forward. Before her disappearance, she had big plans. She was preparing to move into a new place, looking to expand her social media career and continuing her education. Andres Sutter entered Javiera Jimenez's life in 2022. They met through a group of mutual friends she often spent time with. At first, Andres didn't raise any concerns. He presented himself as charismatic, confident, and skilled at making connections. His initial impression was positive. He was attentive, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely interested in her life. Before long, their conversations developed into a romantic relationship. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect. He was supportive, encouraged her ambitions, and expressed admiration for her independence. However, as time went on, troubling signs started to emerge. Javiera began noticing that Andres displayed excessive jealousy. He was uneasy about her job at the bar, kept track of who she interacted with, and frequently asked for explanations about her whereabouts. Gradually, his behavior became more intrusive. He would show up unannounced, even when she had told him she was busy. He went through her questioning every new contact. His jealousy grew increasingly unreasonable. Andres disliked when Javiera spent time with friends, especially if there were men in the group. Later, other concerning details surfaced. Andres was often vague about his own activities. He didn't have a steady job, yet he always seemed to have money. Whenever she asked about his work, he avoided giving clear answers. Over time, Javiera learned that Andres' name had been mentioned in certain circles linked to illegal activities. Among a small group of friends, rumors began circulating that he might have ties to criminal dealings. There were whispers that he could have been involved in theft and unauthorized trade of copper. Some acquaintances warned Javiera to be cautious, but at first, she didn't pay much attention to these concerns. The turning point in their relationship came when Javiera realized without a doubt that Andres was living a double life. She wanted nothing to do with anything unlawful, and had no desire to be around someone who could put her in a dangerous situation. At some point, she made the decision to end things, explaining that she didn't see a future with him. But Andres refused to accept her decision. He continued to follow her, calling repeatedly, showing up unannounced, and trying to convince her to come back. He didn't take her rejection seriously. He was convinced that she would change her mind. When Javiera started avoiding him, Andres became more persistent, warning her that he knew everything about her and wouldn't let her walk away. Javiera had no idea that this breakup would lead to irreversible consequences. August 26, 2022 started as an ordinary day for Javiera. She met with her mother, Gladys Galagillos, to spend time together before her upcoming move. They went to a shopping mall, had lunch, and talked about the changes ahead in Javiera's life. She had been looking forward to this new chapter. Since her parents were planning to relocate, she intended to stay in the family home, giving her more space and independence. During their conversation, Javiera shared her thoughts about the future. She talked about growing her career, increasing her income through social media, and completing her studies. She was full of energy and ambition. Gladys noticed how excited her daughter looked, and it made her happy. After their outing, they returned home, where Javiera helped her mother with household tasks. She had already packed her belongings for the move, and was ready to begin this new phase of her life. Later that evening, just before leaving, Javiera told her mother that she planned to spend the night at a friend's house. It wasn't unusual, she often stayed over with friends. When she arrived at her friend's place, she and her mother continued texting. They discussed moving plans and shared thoughts, as they usually did. Everything seemed normal, but as midnight approached, a message came through that changed everything. Andres Sutter had texted her, "I found your dog." For Javiera, this was huge news. Her dog Lucky had gone missing a few days earlier, and she had been searching nonstop. She had posted about it on social media, offering a reward to anyone who helped bring him home. Losing Lucky had been heartbreaking for her, so Andres' message triggered an immediate response. She texted her mother to let her know she had arrived at her friend's place, but after that, she never responded again. A few hours later, all attempts to reach her by phone went unanswered. The next day, Javiera was supposed to return home, but she never showed up. Her family began calling her friends, but no one knew where she was. Her disappearance was sudden. The only clues her loved ones had were their last conversation with her and the message that would later become a key piece in the investigation. Javiera Jimenez's vanishing deeply worried her family and friends, yet the one person who showed no concern at all was Andres Sutter. When Gladys Galagillos finally got through to him, his response was distant, without any sign of worry. When she asked where her daughter was, he calmly claimed he had no idea. Then, he began explaining his version of events. According to him, that night he had met up with Javiera to help her search for her missing dog. They had driven around to several locations, but their search was unsuccessful. To help her take her mind off things, he suggested they go to Calama, the city where he had grown up. In his version of events, Javiera agreed. She had a suitcase with her, as she was preparing to move the next day, so she might have planned to stay at his place overnight. From there, his story became increasingly inconsistent. He claimed that during their trip, they got into an argument. According to him, Javiera suddenly realized that her suitcase had gone missing. It had supposedly fallen out of the trunk. Upset, she insisted they turn around and look for it. Andres said he pulled over and offered to help search for her belongings, but Javiera refused to get back in the car. She just got out and said she didn't want to continue the trip. "I left her there because that's what she wanted. I figured she'd find a way to get home," he explained. This version of events didn't make sense. Javiera had supposedly ended up alone on a highway in the middle of the night, far from the city, without transportation or a way to call for help, and yet he made no attempt to convince her to get back in the car. He didn't even check to make sure she was safe. Gladys immediately sensed that something was off in his story. She pressed him for specific details, but Andres started contradicting himself. First, he claimed he had dropped her off near Calama. Then, he said it was somewhere on the way back to Antofagasta. He couldn't pinpoint the exact location where this had happened, which only raised more suspicion. When Gladys asked why he hadn't called her, or any of Javiera's friends to let them know that he had left her alone at night, Andres hesitated. "I thought she was just upset and would get home on her own," he said, but it didn't sound convincing. A few hours later, he changed his story. This time, he claimed that after leaving Javiera, he had been involved in a car accident. According to him, another vehicle had hit his car from behind, and he had gone to the hospital to get checked out. This, he said, was why he never went back to look for her. Late Saturday night, nearly 24 hours after Javiera's disappearance, her mother, Gladys Gallegillos, received an unexpected message. It came from an unknown number and seemed strange. "Mom, it's me. I left. There was an accident. I need some time. Don't worry about me. I'll come back once everything is settled. Love you. Take care of Grandma and my brother." Gladys read it over and over. Something felt off. The wording seemed distant, impersonal. But what concerned her the most were the mistakes. Her daughter always wrote carefully, never shortened words, and never made spelling errors. This message contained typos and phrasing that didn't sound like her at all. Her first instinct was to call the number that had sent the message. The call didn't go through. The phone was already turned off. Her worry deepened. She immediately reached out to Javiera's friends and showed them the text. Their reaction was unanimous. Javiera would never have written something like this. They knew her way of texting, her usual expressions, and her tone. This message felt cold and mechanical, nothing like her. The content was also suspiciously vague. Where exactly was she? What kind of accident had happened? Why didn't she explain what was going on? Why send a short, cryptic text from an unfamiliar number instead of calling? Gladys went straight to the police. The message was documented as a possible attempt to mislead the investigation and divert suspicion from a potential crime. A task force was immediately assigned to the case. Investigators first traced the message back to the SIM card it had been sent from. The phone carrier confirmed that the number had been registered to a fake identity, a common tactic used when purchasing anonymous prepaid cards. Next, law enforcement attempted to track the phone's location. They expected to pinpoint a general area, but the device had been powered off shortly after sending the message. The last known signal placed it near Calama, the same area where Andres had claimed to have last seen Javiera. Further analysis revealed that the phone had been used only once for this single message. This meant the text had likely been pre-planned, designed to mislead her family and create the illusion that she had left voluntarily. Experts also examined the content of the message itself. Linguistic analysis confirmed that it had been written by someone unfamiliar with Javiera's typical writing style. The mistakes and unusual phrasing stood out. This was not her voice. This discovery became the key argument proving that the message had been fabricated. It confirmed to law enforcement that Javiera had not disappeared by choice. From that point on, investigators treated the case as a possible crime, and Andres Sutter became the primary suspect. Once the police determined that the message sent in Javiera's name was fake, there was no longer any doubt that foul play was involved. However, without concrete evidence, the investigation moved slowly. Officially, Andres was only a suspect, meaning he was free to move around as he pleased. Realizing that every day without answers reduced their chances of finding the truth, Javiera's family and friends launched their own investigation. They spoke with people who knew Andres, dug into his past, and searched for any signs of his involvement in criminal activities. Before long, they uncovered evidence linking him to illegal dealings. Through mutual acquaintances, they found people who claimed Andres had been involved in stealing copper from trains. He was allegedly part of a group that extracted and sold metal on the black market. Additionally, reports surfaced about his aggressive behavior. Those who knew him described a short temper. He frequently got into conflicts, had been involved in physical altercations, and couldn't tolerate being contradicted. These details only heightened the family's fears. If he had a history of aggression, he was more than capable of committing a serious crime, especially in a fit of rage. Javiera's friends recalled that she had confided in them about Andres becoming increasingly controlling and obsessive. They found old messages where she had expressed concern that he was tracking her, calling her multiple times a day, and demanding to know her every move. While her loved ones continued their search for answers, the police conducted a forensic examination of Andres' car. Since he was the last known person to see Javiera alive, his vehicle could hold crucial evidence. Inside, investigators found of blood, Initial analysis revealed stains on the passenger seat and the interior of the door. They also recovered fibers that appeared to match the clothing Javiera had been wearing. The blood samples were sent for DNA testing. A few days later, the results confirmed the worst fears. The blood belonged to Javiera Jimenez. This discovery completely dismantled Andres' story that he had simply dropped her off on the highway. If she had left his car voluntarily, why was her blood inside? And if she had been injured, why hadn't he reported it? Police also obtained GPS data from his vehicle. The analysis showed that on the night of Javiera's disappearance, Andres had indeed been heading toward Calama. However, instead of following the main route, he had taken a side road leading into the desert. His car remained in that remote area for an extended period before continuing its journey. This information became a turning point in the case. Investigators now believed that this location could be where a crime had occurred or where evidence had been hidden. When Andres learned that the police had received the forensic results, he realized his arrest was imminent. His demeanor changed. He stopped contacting even those he had once trusted. A day before he was scheduled for police questioning, he suddenly packed a bag and left his apartment. Surveillance cameras captured him exiting his building with a small backpack before getting into a car. Neighbors later confirmed that he had left in a hurry and hadn't returned. Authorities immediately issued a warrant for his arrest, but by then, he was already gone. Further investigation revealed that Andres had used fake documents to cross the border. Now he was officially a fugitive. His name was entered into an international criminal database, but he had managed to disappear. For Javiera's family, all that remained was to keep fighting for justice and waiting. They were certain of one thing. Sooner or later, he would make a mistake, and when that happened, the law would catch up with him. The first attempts by law enforcement to apprehend Andres were unsuccessful. His car was found abandoned on the outskirts of Antofagasta, but he was nowhere to be seen. It was clear that he had carefully planned his escape route in advance. An analysis of his phone records showed that, in the hours before his disappearance, he had contacted several individuals already under police scrutiny for suspected involvement in criminal activities. This reinforced the theory that he had used his connections to disappear. Before long, investigators confirmed that Andres had fled Chile, crossing the border into Bolivia illegally. He had avoided official checkpoints, using lesser-known smuggling routes often utilized by traffickers. Once in another country, he assumed a new identity. For months, he managed to stay hidden, fully aware that authorities were actively searching for him. Despite the challenges in the investigation, Javiera's loved ones refused to give up. Gladys Galagios relentlessly pushed to keep the case in the public eye, ensuring that Andres Sutter remained on international wanted lists. The family reached out to the media, spread awareness through social networks, and distributed flyers with his photo. They hoped that someone somewhere would recognize him and alert the authorities. But the most effective step came when they announced a reward for information leading to his capture. The family offered a substantial sum to anyone who could provide credible details about his whereabouts. This tactic worked before long. The first leads began to surface. In late 2023, reports emerged that Andres had been spotted in a Bolivian city. He was living a reclusive lifestyle, avoiding attention and keeping minimal contact with locals. Bolivian authorities began tracking his movements. Using intelligence gathered from informants, they discovered that he had been living under an assumed name, working odd jobs, and avoiding any use of official documents that could expose his true identity. But he hadn't managed to disappear completely. In January 2024, a local resident, motivated by the reward, provided law enforcement with his exact location. Authorities acted immediately, launching a targeted operation to capture him. On January 5, 2024, in a Bolivian city, police officers surrounded the building where Andres Sutter had been hiding. The operation was swift. He didn't resist and was taken into custody on the spot. During his arrest, he showed no panic or aggression. He appeared calm, as if he had already accepted his fate. But this time there was no escape. Andres was officially in custody and would soon face justice in Chile. Following the confirmation of his arrest, Bolivian authorities initiated extradition procedures. Within days, Andres was transported back to Chile, where he would finally stand trial. Javier's family could finally see the person responsible for taking their daughter's life face justice. But for them, this was only the beginning of a long fight. They were determined to ensure he received the strictest possible sentence. After Andres Sutter was extradited to Chile, he was immediately placed in a detention facility. The investigation entered a new phase. Now that the primary suspect was in custody, authorities had a real opportunity to get the answers they had been seeking for nearly a year and a half. At first, he refused to talk. He avoided direct questions, repeatedly insisting that he had nothing to do with Javier's disappearance. But investigators were prepared. The evidence they had gathered pointed directly to his involvement. The pressure mounted. Eventually, he stopped denying the obvious. In a cold, emotionless voice, he said, "I killed her." His confession was devoid of emotion, delivered as if it were nothing more than a simple fact. There was no remorse, no attempt to justify his actions. He didn't try to play the victim, nor did he express regret. His tone remained disturbingly calm, as if he were recounting an ordinary event. The details he provided completely contradicted his previous statements. He admitted that he had not initially planned to harm Javier, but after she refused to reconcile with him and ended their relationship for good, he made a decision he never intended to reverse. He lured her in with a false promise, telling her he had found her lost dog. Trusting him, unaware of what awaited her, she agreed to meet. According to him, the crime took place late at night on a deserted highway. He pulled over under the pretense of searching for a missing suitcase that had supposedly fallen from the trunk. When Javier stepped out of the car, he delivered a fatal blow. Afterward, he drove deeper into the desert, dug a shallow grave, and buried her remains, believing that the harsh climate would erase all evidence. The day after his confession, investigators set out to locate the burial site. They searched the area using the coordinates provided by Andres. In mid-January 2024, authorities discovered human remains. The site was carefully examined, a shallow grave covered in sand. Forensic specialists began the identification process, but Javiera's loved ones already knew the truth. A few days later, forensic analysis confirmed what they had feared. The remains belonged to Javiera Jimenez. The search was over, but the fight for responsible. Following his confession, the case was handed over to the court. There was no longer any question of his guilt. His own words, the evidence, and the discovery of Javiera's body left no room for doubt. Now it was up to the court to determine his punishment. Javiera's family demanded the harshest possible sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. They were certain he posed a danger to society. For her mother, Gladys Galagillos, there was no other definition of justice. She firmly believed that if Andres were ever released, he would commit another crime. The prosecution presented all the evidence to the court. Experts confirmed that the crime had been premeditated, the deceptive invitation, the decision to take her to a deserted location, and the complete lack of any attempt to help her all pointed to a carefully planned act. Forensic specialists documented injuries that disproved any claim that this had been an accident. However, the defense attempted to push for a reduced sentence. The attorney argued that his client had confessed voluntarily and had assisted in locating the remains, which, from a legal standpoint, could be considered cooperation with the investigation. They requested leniency based on this technicality. This argument outraged Javiera's family. To them, it was obvious that Andres' confession was not an act of remorse. He had only admitted the truth after being backed into a corner. He felt no guilt. He was simply trying to reduce his sentence. The trial lasted for several weeks. Gladys attended every session, watching the process unfold. She never let her emotions take over, but her unwavering determination was clear in her eyes. During the final hearing, the judge gave her the opportunity to speak. The courtroom fell silent. She stood, looked directly at the accused, and slowly said, "This man took my daughter from me. He ended her life, buried her in the desert, and then ran away, hoping no one would ever find him. He has not regretted it for a single second. He feels no remorse. If he is ever released, he will do this again. I ask this court to impose the only sentence he deserves, life in prison. I'm not asking for revenge. I am demanding justice." Her words were the final argument before the court adjourned to deliver the verdict. A few hours later, the judge returned and read the decision. Andres Sutter was found guilty of the premeditated crime of Javiera Jimenez. Considering the severity of the act and his attempt to flee justice, the court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in quiet approval. Gladys Galagillos broke into tears, embracing her loved ones. This was the end of a long fight, though not the end of her pain. Her daughter would never return, but at least justice had been served. Now Andres Sutter would spend the rest of his life behind bars, exactly where he belonged. Case 7. Elliot Oliver Robertson Roger was born to Peter Roger, the filmmaker who worked on some sections of The Hunger Games, and Lee Chin Roger, a research assistant. I'm 22 years old, and I'm still a virgin. I've never even kissed a girl. Elliot was born into a quite privileged environment in London, England, on July 24, 1991. His family later settled in California after moving to the United States while he was still growing up. Despite the affluence in his upbringing, there was much emotional turmoil arising throughout Roger's life. Elliot was socially awkward and struggled to make friends from an early age. Parents, though divorced at the age of 7, were involved in his life. As Roger reached his adolescent years, he continuously spoke about his feelings of loneliness and low self-esteem. As a teenager, Roger went to several schools without ever finding his place among his peers. He soon became obsessed with the pecking order, felt at the bottom of the pile, and blamed others for his miserable life. Entries in his diary and later in his manifesto make clear a growing resentment against peers who seemed more successful socially, particularly men he envied and women he thought had rejected him. I've waited a long time for this. I'll give you exactly what you deserve. All of you, all you girls who rejected me and looked down upon me, and all of you men for living a better life than me. All of you socially active men. I hate you. I hate all of you. In the following years, Roger's mental health problems started to surface. He had received therapists, was diagnosed with Asperger's, and was experiencing bouts of depression. Yet all these interventions appeared to have little impact as deeper feelings of anger and frustration started to surface. As Elliot Roger approached his late teens and early 20s, the feelings of isolation and resentment that had plagued him for years became increasingly pronounced. Living in Isla Vista, a community known for its vibrant student life due to its proximity to the University of California, Santa Barbara, Roger found himself surrounded by the social interactions, relationships, and carefree fun he desperately desired but felt incapable of achieving. This environment only deepened his sense of alienation as he felt perpetually on the outside looking in. In 2014, Roger began compiling his infamous 141-page manifesto titled My Twisted World. This document provides a detailed and chilling account of his life from his childhood through his meticulously planned day of retribution. The manifesto offers unsettling insight into his thought process, revealing a young man consumed by entitlement, anger, and despair. I can't wait to give you exactly what you deserve. Key themes include his belief that women owed him their attention and affection, his envy and resentment toward men he perceived as more socially successful, his obsession with social status, and his grandiose fantasies of revenge. Roger repeatedly expressed outrage at women for rejecting him, believing romantic and sexual relationships to be his right. He blamed women collectively for his unhappiness and viewed men who attracted women with envy, expressing a desire to punish them for their perceived success. His manifesto also highlighted his fixation on achieving a lifestyle he believed he deserved, fueled by constant comparisons to peers, as well as his delusional vision of himself as a savior, punishing society for perceived injustices. Roger's frustrations found a toxic outlet online, where he became active in forums such as PUA Hate, a community focused on criticizing pickup artists while harboring deeply misogynistic views. These forums amplified Roger's grievances and validated his belief that women in society at large were to blame for his misery. His radicalization is further documented in the videos he uploaded to YouTube in the months leading up to the attack. In these clips, he lamented his virginity, berated women, and announced his plans for retribution. Despite their disturbing content, the videos went largely unnoticed outside his small audience until after the attack. In the months leading up to the killings, there were several missed opportunities for intervention. Roger's parents were aware of his struggles and had tried to intervene. His mother, alarmed by his disturbing YouTube videos, contacted authorities, but when law enforcement conducted a wellness check, they found Roger polite and composed, ultimately taking no action. Roger had been in therapy from a young age, but these efforts failed to address his escalating issues, partly due to his refusal to take prescribed medication. Despite living in a shared apartment, he had few meaningful connections, and his roommates ultimately became his first victims. By the time May 2014 arrived, Roger had meticulously planned his day of retribution, purchasing firearms and mapping out his attack. His manifesto and online activity made it clear that he saw this act as both revenge and a way to achieve notoriety. The tragic events of May 23, 2014, in Isla Vista, California, unfolded in 3 distinct phases, leaving 6 victims dead, 14 others injured, and an entire community devastated. Elliot Rodger meticulously planned his attack as described in his 141-page manifesto, intending to carry out a series of violent acts involving stabbing, shooting, and vehicular assault. His targets included his roommates, women he perceived as rejecting him, and random bystanders, underscoring the calculated and deeply personal nature of his grievances. Elliot Rodger here, and here I am at Serenia Park, the most significant place of my childhood. I wish I could be a kid again. Those were the happy years, and I could just live my life without realizing how cruel the world really is. The violence began in Rodger's apartment with the brutal stabbings of his 2 roommates, George Chun and Chung Yuan Hong, along with their friend Wei-An Wang. These young men, aged 19 and 20, were completely unprepared for the ferocity of the attack, unable to defend themselves as Rodger carried out his plan. In his manifesto, Rodger expressed a deep resentment toward his roommates, whom he viewed as emblematic of his perceived social rejection and isolation. The act of stabbing these men in the very space they shared with him reflected a profoundly personal and disturbing aspect of Rodger's anger, as he targeted those closest to him in the first phase of his assault. Following the murders in his apartment, Rodger transitioned to the second phase of his attack. He uploaded a chilling final video to YouTube, titled Elliot Rodger's Retribution, in which he outlined his plans and articulated his hatred toward women and society at large. In the video, Rodger spoke of exacting revenge for what he perceived as years of rejection and injustice, blaming women for not giving him the romantic and sexual relationships he felt entitled to, and society for allowing him to feel marginalized. With his manifesto and video acting as his final declarations, Rodger set his deadly plans into motion. He drove to the Alpha Phi sorority house at the University of California, Santa Barbara, a location he had described in his manifesto as the hot spot of female perfection. According to his writings, this sorority house represented everything Rodger despised about women, an idealized version of beauty and popularity that he believed had spurned him throughout his life. When Rodger was unable to gain entry to the house, he turned his fury on bystanders outside, firing indiscriminately and killing 2 women, Catherine Cooper and Veronica Weiss. Cooper, 22, and Weiss, 19, were young UCSB students with bright futures ahead of them, their lives senselessly cut short in the chaos of Rodger's rampage. Rodger's violence did not stop at the sorority house. He began driving through the streets of Isla Vista, targeting pedestrians and cyclists at random. His car became a mobile weapon, allowing him to move quickly between locations as he continued his shooting spree. During this phase, Rodger stopped briefly at a deli where he shot and killed Christopher Michaels Martinez, a 20-year-old UCSB student who had simply been inside the establishment. Michaels Martinez, like the other victims, was a vibrant young person with dreams and aspirations that would never be realized, a life stolen in the midst of Rodger's escalating violence. The final phase of Rodger's attack involved the use of his car as a weapon of destruction. As law enforcement began pursuing him, he drove recklessly through the streets of Isla Vista, running over pedestrians in his path. Witnesses described the chaos as Rodger swerved erratically, intent on causing as much harm as possible before his plan reached its conclusion. The chase ended when Rodger crashed into a parked car, bringing his rampage to an abrupt halt. When police approached his vehicle, they discovered that Rodger had fatally shot himself in the head. Inside the car, authorities found 3 semi-automatic handguns and over 400 rounds of ammunition, evidence of the extensive planning and preparation Rodger had undertaken in the lead-up to the attack. The victims of the Isla Vista killings were young individuals with promising futures. Their lives and stories tragically cut short by Rodger's actions. George Chun, 19, was described by friends and family as kind and academically driven, with a bright future ahead of him. Chung Yuan Hong, 20, shared similar qualities, remembered for his gentle nature and close ties to his family. Wei-An Wang, 20, was a recent addition to the household and had dreams of academic and professional success. Catherine Cooper, 22, was a beloved UCSB student with a vibrant personality, while Veronica Weiss, 19, was remembered as a dedicated student and athlete who touched the lives of those around her. Christopher Michaels Martinez, 20, was a UCSB student with aspirations of becoming a lawyer, a young man known for his compassion and sense of justice. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the grief of the victims' families and the broader community became central to the public response. Parents and loved ones shared memories of those lost, turning their pain into advocacy for change. Richard Martinez, the father of Christopher Michaels Martinez, became a prominent voice in the push for gun control, channeling his grief into a call for action to prevent future tragedies. The senseless loss of these young lives highlighted not only the devastating consequences of Roger's actions, but also the systemic issues that allowed his violence to escalate unchecked. Parents used to always take me here when I was a kid, back when my life was happy and fair, back when I thought the world was fair. How naive I was. I was only an innocent child. The Isla Vista killings underscored significant failings in recognizing and addressing warning signs. In the months leading up to the attack, there were numerous opportunities for intervention that went unheeded. Roger's parents had expressed concerns about his mental health, and his mother had alerted authorities after viewing his disturbing YouTube videos. However, when law enforcement conducted a wellness check at Roger's apartment, they found him polite and composed, ultimately taking no action. This failure to recognize the severity of the threat Rogers posed reflected broader challenges in addressing mental health crises and the limitations of current systems in preventing violence. Rogers' extensive history of therapy and mental health struggles also came into sharp focus. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and experiencing bouts of depression, Rogers had been in therapy for much of his life. Despite these efforts, his refusal to take prescribed medication and his increasing isolation rendered these interventions insufficient. This is my usual sunset spot, mainly because there's rarely any young couples here that I would get jealous of. His online activity, particularly his participation in misogynistic forums like PUA Hate, further exacerbated his grievances and radicalized his worldview. These platforms provided a toxic echo chamber that validated Rogers' anger and entitlement, reinforcing his belief that women in society were to blame for his misery. The events of May 23, 2014 revealed the devastating consequences of unchecked anger, entitlement, and alienation. They also highlighted systemic issues in identifying and addressing warning signs, as well as the role of online communities in fostering radicalization. The victims' stories and the pain of their families remain a stark reminder of the human cost of such tragedies, emphasizing the need for a multifaceted approach to prevention, including mental health support, gun control, and addressing toxic cultural narratives. As Isla Vista continues to heal, the memory of those lost serves as a call to action to build a safer, more compassionate society. The Isla Vista killings remain a chilling reminder of how personal grievances, untreated mental health challenges, and online radicalization can intertwine to produce devastating violence. Elliot Rogers' actions, as chronicled in his manifesto and video statements, were the product of a complex interplay of factors, each demanding careful analysis to prevent similar tragedies in the future. At the core of Rogers' motives was a deeply entrenched misogyny. He believed that women owed him affection and sexual attention, framing his violent actions as retribution against a society he saw as unfairly denying him what he felt entitled to. His manifesto and videos reveal an obsessive fixation on his virginity and a simmering resentment toward women whom he blamed for his unhappiness. This entitlement fueled his hatred, positioning women as the primary targets of his grievances. Rogers' ideology was emblematic of the growing incel, involuntary celibate movement, a term that gained notoriety after his attacks, but had already begun to coalesce in online communities at the time. Rogers' engagement with online forums such as PUA Hate, an anti-pickup artist community, provided fertile ground for his toxic beliefs to deepen. These platforms served as echo chambers, validating his anger and amplifying his misogynistic views. While the incel movement encompasses a range of ideologies, its core often perpetuates harmful narratives that dehumanize women and encourage hostility. Within these communities, Rogers became a symbol of violent resistance, with some participants leonizing him as a figure of revenge against perceived societal injustices. This dangerous glorification underscores the unchecked radicalization that can occur in such online spaces, where vulnerable individuals find validation for destructive thoughts. Rogers' mental health struggles were another significant factor in the tragedy. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and experiencing depression, he exhibited clear signs of social isolation and distress from an early age. Despite years of therapy and his family's attempts to support him, his condition deteriorated as he aged. "I've been cast out," No one likes me. No one accepts me. All my life I've been struggling to fit in with the popular kids. I've been struggling to get a girlfriend. No one has ever accepted me. Roger's refusal to fully engage with treatment or take prescribed medication limited the effectiveness of these interventions, leaving him to spiral further into anger and resentment. Hey, Elliot, Roger here. I'm sitting in my car, making another entry in my collection of vlogs. Ever since I hit puberty, I've wanted girls. I've desired girls. I've been sexually attracted to girls, but they've never shown any attraction back to me. His manifesto details his long-standing feelings of inadequacy and rejection, offering a window into the mind of someone unable to reconcile his expectations with reality. The system failed to address Roger's escalating behavior adequately, despite clear warning signs. In the weeks leading up to the attack, his mother alerted authorities to his disturbing online activity, prompting a wellness check by law enforcement. However, when deputies visited him, Roger presented himself as calm and polite, leading them to dismiss the concerns. This interaction highlighted a critical gap in assessing and managing mental health crises, as well as the challenges of identifying underlying threats when an individual does not outwardly display alarming behavior. A more thorough investigation could have uncovered his growing arsenal of firearms, the manifesto outlining his plans, or other red flags, potentially averting the tragedy. Roger's access to firearms was another enabling factor in the attack. Over the course of a year, he legally purchased 3 semi-automatic handguns, passing all required background checks despite his documented mental health issues. This aspect of the case reignited national debates about gun control, particularly regarding access to firearms for individuals with known mental health challenges. In response, California enacted the Gun Violence Restraining Order law, allowing family members and law enforcement to petition for the temporary removal of firearms from individuals deemed a danger to themselves or others. While this legislation represents progress, it also highlights the gaps that allowed Roger to arm himself and carry out his plans, despite clear signs of distress and danger. Beyond individual factors, Roger's story reflects broader cultural and societal issues. Toxic masculinity, the societal expectation that men must achieve specific markers of success, such as romantic relationships, financial status, or social dominance, exacerbated Roger's feelings of inadequacy. His manifesto reveals the destructive impact of these pressures, particularly when coupled with an inability to cope with rejection or perceived failure. Roger's belief that his self-worth was tied to romantic and sexual success left him vulnerable to intense feelings of resentment and entitlement when reality fell short of his expectations. The internet played a critical role in fostering and amplifying Roger's grievances. Online spaces provided him with a platform to express his frustrations and connect with like-minded individuals who reinforced his toxic worldview. The anonymity and insularity of these forums created an environment where harmful ideologies could thrive unchecked, emboldening Roger's sense of victimhood and fueling his plans for revenge. This case highlights the dangers of online radicalization, where individuals can be drawn into echo chambers that validate and escalate their most destructive thoughts. The Isla Vista killings serve as a stark reminder of the multifaceted nature of mass violence and the systemic failures that can enable it. Addressing the underlying issues requires a comprehensive approach. Improved mental health resources and interventions are crucial, particularly for individuals who exhibit early signs of social isolation or distress. Law enforcement must receive better training in identifying and responding to mental health crises, with a focus on assessing potential threats beyond surface-level interactions. Stricter regulations on firearm access, particularly for individuals with known mental health challenges, are essential to prevent future tragedies. Equally important is the need to challenge harmful cultural narratives. Combating toxic masculinity and addressing the unrealistic pressures placed on men to achieve specific ideals can help reduce feelings of entitlement and inadequacy. Efforts to monitor and counteract radicalization in online spaces are also critical, ensuring that vulnerable individuals do not find validation for destructive ideologies. The victims of the Isla Vista killings, George Chin, Chung Yuen Hong, Wei-Han Wang, Catherine Cooper, Veronica Weiss, and Christopher Michaels Martinez, were young individuals with promising futures, tragically cut short by Roger's actions. Their stories and the grief of their families continue to resonate, serving as a call to action for meaningful change. By addressing the interconnected factors that contributed to this tragedy, society can work to prevent similar events and honor the memory of those lost. The aftermath of the Isla Vista killings was a period marked by profound grief, public outrage, and a collective determination to address the systemic issues that contributed to the tragedy. Families of the victims, particularly Richard Martinez, father of Christopher Michaels Martinez, emerged as vocal advocates for change. Martinez's impassioned plea, "Not one more," became a rallying cry for those calling for stricter gun control and greater accountability. His voice galvanized a movement, uniting activists, lawmakers, and communities in a shared demand to prevent future tragedies. The Isla Vista killings prompted significant legislative action, particularly in California, where reforms were introduced to address some of the systemic failures highlighted by the case. Among the most notable was the introduction of the Gun Violence Restraining Order, GVRO, a law designed to empower courts to temporarily prohibit individuals deemed a threat to themselves or others from accessing firearms. The GVRO became a model for similar legislation in other states, offering families and law enforcement a critical tool for intervening when red flags emerge. This legislation reflected a growing recognition of the need to balance individual rights with public safety in cases involving mental health crises and potential violence. In addition to gun control reforms, the tragedy spurred efforts to enhance mental health interventions. The Isla Vista killings exposed significant gaps in how mental health issues were identified and addressed, particularly for individuals who resist treatment or display warning signs without overtly threatening behavior. California responded by implementing measures to improve collaboration between healthcare providers and law enforcement, aiming to create a more cohesive system for recognizing and responding to potential threats. While these changes represent important progress, the broader national debates surrounding gun control and mental health care remain deeply polarized and unresolved. Elliot Rodger's actions and the manifesto he left behind forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about misogyny, toxic masculinity, and the radicalizing influence of online communities. His deep-seated resentment toward women and belief in male entitlement highlighted the pervasive nature of harmful gender dynamics that often go unaddressed. The attack brought the term incel, short for involuntary celibate, into mainstream discourse, exposing a subculture that, while diverse in its expressions, often perpetuates hatred toward women and reinforces damaging stereotypes about relationships and societal expectations. The Isla Vista killings sparked widespread discussions about how societal norms and cultural narratives contribute to feelings of inadequacy and entitlement, particularly among young men. Toxic masculinity, the expectation that men must achieve dominance, success, and romantic relationships to validate their self-worth, emerged as a key issue in understanding Rodger's grievances. His manifesto and online activity revealed how these pressures, coupled with social isolation, can fester into dangerous resentment. The case also shone a light on the role of online communities in radicalizing vulnerable individuals. Platforms like PUA Hate, where Rodgers found validation for his toxic beliefs, were identified as echo chambers that amplify anger and misogyny. These forums allowed Rodgers to connect with others who shared his frustrations, reinforcing and escalating his sense of victimhood and entitlement. The incident underscored the urgent need for greater scrutiny of harmful online spaces and more proactive measures to counteract the spread of radical ideologies. Rodgers' mental health struggles and resistance to treatment were central to the tragedy, highlighting the challenges of addressing mental health crises, particularly for young men. His refusal to fully engage with therapy and medication underscored the limitations of voluntary interventions in cases where individuals are unwilling or unable to acknowledge the severity of their issues. Advocates have since called for greater public awareness of mental health, early intervention programs, and efforts to destigmatize seeking help, especially among men who may feel societal pressure to suppress vulnerability. The case also illuminated systemic shortcomings in recognizing and responding to warning signs. Law enforcement's wellness check at Rodgers' apartment, conducted just weeks before the attack, was a missed opportunity for intervention. Despite his mother's concerns and the disturbing content of his online videos, deputies found Rodgers calm and polite, ultimately taking no further action. This failure underscored the need for better training for law enforcement in assessing mental health crises and understanding the nuanced behaviors of potentially dangerous individuals. The Isla Vista killings left an indelible mark on societal discourse, pushing issues such as gun control, mental health care, misogyny, and online radicalization to the forefront of public consciousness. While legislative changes like the GVRO represent meaningful progress, much work remains to address the root causes of such tragedies. This includes fostering a culture that promotes mental well-being, challenges harmful gender norms, and counters the spread of extremist ideologies online. As the community continues to heal, the stories of the victims and the advocacy of their families serve as a powerful reminder of the need for change. Their loss is a call to action, a demand for a society that prioritizes compassion, safety, and accountability. By addressing the interconnected factors that contributed to the Isla Vista killings, there is hope that similar tragedies can be prevented, honoring the memory of those whose lives were tragically cut short. The Isla Vista killings stand as a sobering reminder of the complex interplay between personal struggles, pressures, and systemic failures. Elliot Rodgers' descent into violence was not an inevitability, but rather the tragic outcome of missed warning signs, untreated mental health challenges, and toxic ideologies that thrived in isolation and online spaces. This case compels us to confront these issues with urgency and compassion. As we reflect on this tragedy, it becomes clear that early intervention, stronger systems of accountability, and proactive efforts to challenge the cultural and structural forces that perpetuate misogyny and violence are essential. The Isla Vista victims' legacy calls for continued advocacy and action to create a safer, more inclusive, and compassionate society. Legislative reforms like California's gun violence restraining order mark important progress, but they are just the beginning. To prevent future tragedies, we must tackle the deeper roots of alienation, entitlement, and radicalization that lead individuals down such destructive paths. This means fostering a culture that values mental health, promotes healthy social connections, and confronts harmful narratives head-on. By learning from the Isla Vista killings, we honor the memories of those whose lives were tragically cut short. Their loss serves as a powerful call to action, a reminder of our shared responsibility to build a world where such violence becomes unthinkable. Together, we can reaffirm our commitment to ensuring that no more lives are lost to preventable tragedies.